The employee from the Silver Hand Alchemy Workshop apologized. "Sir, I don't think anyone would be arrogant enough to set questions for the Silver Hand." "All right," John shrugged. "As a bonus question, then." He was pressed into lecturing the examiners while the others took their tests. At last, the final day of exams ended. There were only a few days left before they would leave Hogwarts. The train would take them in the third week of June. The seventh years stood around with mixed emotions. 7 years went by in the blink of an eye, Neville said, watching the younger students chatter excitedly. Malfoy glared at a cluster of fifth-year boys and muttered, "Astoria's still got 2 years left. I'll have to warn those idiots to stay away from her." The fifth years, deep in conversation about exam questions, had no idea they'd suddenly become targets. Daphne looked a little stung and went to find her sister. They drifted down the corridor together. Peeves' mischief echoed through the castle, and a handful of students got properly startled. John lingered at the doorway to the Great Hall and leaned against the stone, watching the scene inside. He could still see himself there once, the Sorting Hat shouting, "Slytherin." "I still remember John beating Draco here," Neville said with feeling. "You remember everything, don't you?" Malfoy snapped, flushed and annoyed. His dark past had been dredged up, and he bristled. "Don't forget who bounced back with a leglocker curse on him." Neville gave him a look. John smiled. No one would have guessed back then that they'd end up as friends. A Muggle-born Slytherin, a proud pureblood, and a timid Gryffindor. They seemed like three parallel lines that would never meet until fate intervened. The Muggle-born became the king of Slytherin. The pureblood who once spat bloodlines made friends with a Muggle and with Neville, the boy he used to bully. And Neville, once timid and round-faced, grew into the brave hero who killed Voldemort, won a Hufflepuff girlfriend, and built himself into a strong man. They stood there quietly, remembering the frightening things they'd done together. The Longbottoms healed, the Malfoy family restored to its ancient status, the King of Slytherin made King of Hogwarts, then the second king of the magical world. "Professor Sprout suggested I take a year out in the field," Neville said. "She reckons school knowledge can't compare to practical experience, says I should go to Albania." "That's a fine place," John agreed. "Full of magical plants and creatures. Professor Sprout's advice is sound." Malfoy sniffed. "Puddlemere United offered me a place. I'll be the most valuable seeker on the pitch." Puddlemere United, one of the oldest clubs in the Quidditch League. Malfoy's abilities had finally earned him recognition that even Lucius couldn't cheapen. John chuckled. "That's something." They all laughed at the thought. The future of the magical world was about to meet John Wick. A final feast awaited before the term closed. Slughorn wasn't in his office, but John was used to that. He stood before the stone gargoyle and said the password, Norwegian Longhair. The gargoyle hopped aside, and John went in. The sword of Gryffindor sat where it always did, untouched. John's real aim wasn't the sword. He crossed the room to the Sorting Hat. "It's you, John Wick," the hat said. "You've been appearing here a lot these past 2 years." "I want to try again," John said, picking it up. Cobwebs clung to it. He even found himself admiring the tiny spiders and wondering how long they'd been weaving. He put the hat on his head. "You haven't changed," it said. "Slytherin ambition, Gryffindor courage, Hufflepuff's loyalty. You've seen a lot these years. Even your dean's been talking about you here." The Sorting Hat knew the secrets of the headmaster's office, but none of them are like me. You are a Slytherin. Slytherin is the place for you. John took the hat off and sighed. "Slytherin, huh? If I'd been put in Gryffindor back then, would things have been different?" "No matter where you are, you follow the path meant for you," the hat replied. "I met Gryffindor," John said, looking at the sword. "He praised my bravery. I met Ravenclaw. She admired my wit. I met Hufflepuff. She pitied my lot, but Slytherin never truly acknowledged me." He hesitated. Maybe Salazar's spirit is gone, or maybe he just wouldn't have approved. "You are the most magical wizard I've known." The Sorting Hat protested. "Salazar has long since left Hogwarts." John was noncommittal. He walked to the sword and touched the blade. The sword of Gryffindor shivered at his hand. Swords do what they will over true Gryffindors. John's touch didn't make it reject him. Once he had wanted a sword like this. Now he owned a different blade, a silver vein sword. The Gryffindor sword seemed restless, as if it wanted to be free. "No," John murmured, smiling. "You belong here with the school." He rubbed the blade gently. "Watch. Wait until the one you truly choose appears." The sword stilled. John decided not to take it. He already had his own weapon, and this one belonged to Hogwarts. Passing the sorting hat, he paused, drew his wand, and gave the old thing a quick, thorough cleaning. "What are you doing?" The hat wailed as John polished out years of grime. "No, don't, my 1,000 years of patina," it protested. The hat's squawks were comical. John put his wand away, satisfied, and set the cleaned hat back where it belonged. "This'll be my second gift to Hogwarts," he said. When Slughorn returned and inspected the hat, he was puzzled into delight. He'd suspected someone had swapped it, but when the hat spoke his own voice, confirmed it was the real thing. "Good heavens, you've had a bath." Slughorn had long grumbled about the hat's filth, but the traditions of the school and the hat's stubbornness had kept it so. Seeing it clean, Slughorn found it oddly pleasing. John had done something small for the school, something everyone would cheer for, then slipped away without fanfare. The last 2 days of term were relaxed. In Slytherin, they lounged after exams. Malfoy and Astoria were openly affectionate, whispering about petty vows. "You won't find a new boyfriend after I leave, will you?" and the like. Then the prank happened. Malfoy was discovered dangling upside down in front of the great glass of the Slytherin common room, his robes tangled and hair a mess. Outside, a group of merpeople had gathered by the Black Lake and were pointing and chattering at him through the water glass. Daphne breathed out in relief. Finally, her sister knew how to discipline him. Blaise looked on baffled, as if questioning the meaning of life. "He's like this, and Astoria doesn't dump him?" he asked incredulously. Blaise, who'd spent 2 years pestering Ginny Weasley, was bewildered. Astoria inspected her wand with a small, satisfied frown, wondering why the Bat-Bogey hex had been so easy to cast this time. Was it because the target was Malfoy? Malfoy, dangling and damp, found himself oddly unsettled. "I feel something is wrong," he muttered, swinging a little. "Very, very wrong." This familiar sensation, this familiar magic, could Tom be picking up bad habits from Daphne? Tom the cat flicked his tail and darted out of the Slytherin entrance, leaving Crookshanks alone in the courtyard. The two animals were no reflection of their owners' hostilities. They took to each other easily. Hermione, looking for Crookshanks, paused to watch them. She didn't interfere as Crookshanks, with characteristic reluctance, leaned against Tom. Above them, Basil streaked across the sky. A long-eared black owl named Riddle flew beneath him. Suddenly, Basil fixated on a snowy owl roosting near Gryffindor Tower. In the next instant, a furious aerial scuffle erupted, and Basil swept into the tower. Screams and exclamations followed. Feathers filled the dormitory. Ron's owl, Pigwidgeon, cowered in a corner, terrified of getting caught in the fray. Harry and Ron tried to intercept Basil, but he got away, clutching a few snowy owl feathers. As he flew off, he scattered them down the corridors. The feathers drifted lazily through the castle. Some students, amused, gave chase, batting at them and laughing. Neville emerged from Professor Sprout's office just as one student bumped full tilt into his solid chest. "Sorry," the student mumbled. Neville steadied them with an unshakable calm, like a small rock. A feather landed on Neville's shoulder. A hand reached from behind and stood on tiptoe to pluck it. Neville turned. Hannah Abbott stood there, pretty and shy, twirling the feather between finger and thumb. Neville held out his hand. Hannah slipped hers into his, and they walked down the corridor together. "Hi, Neville." "Hi, Hannah." Luna Lovegood skipped past, carrying fruit and calling cheerfully to them. The large, disc-like shell on her back swung. Sunlight caught it and sparkled. Wooden beads clinked on her wrist as she made for a window and shouted down, "Mr. Crumplehorn." She let the fruit fall. On the first floor, the Crumplehorn snorkack, like a small calf, skewered apples and other fruit precisely with its horn, threading them into a neat line. One apple bounced off its head and rolled free. Ginny stooped to scoop it up and, with the accuracy of a chaser, flung it straight into the snorkack's open mouth. "Hi, Luna," Ginny called, smiling. She waved without noticing a long-eared house elf approaching. Winky, laden with a sack of potatoes, bumped Ginny's foot and apologized profusely. Ginny, generous as ever, brushed it off. Winky hurried on toward the kitchens. For the end-of-term feast, they needed a great many potatoes and pumpkins, so Winky had been sent to haul produce from the farther grounds. Inside the kitchens, Winky went into work mode. Dobby rushed over to help, but Winky snapped, "Winky does not want bad Dobby's help. Winky can do it herself." Dobby bristled at the implication. "Not bad, Dobby. Dobby is a free elf," he protested reasonably. A potato rolled off the table, slipped between the feet of several busy house elves, and fell down a cleaned, disassembled drain. It was neither too big nor too small, just the right size to make the journey. The potato rattled along the drain pipe, falling from the kitchen and then farther still. At last it dropped from a pipe beneath Hogwarts and plopped into the Chamber of Secrets. A heavy door opened. John re-entered Salazar Slytherin's Chamber of Secrets. Of the four founders' hidden chambers, this one was the most notorious. Gryffindor's room reflected bold adventure. Ravenclaw's remained hidden to those of lesser wit. Hufflepuff's quietly served the house. Slytherin's, however, had always been different, shrouded in legend, whispered about as a purging ground for the non-pure blood, home to terrible basilisks and tainted magics. It was an anomaly among the founders' halls. Unlike the others, it no longer hosted a conscious presence of its founder. John stood there with a little of the old mixed into his mood. He had once fought a basilisk here. He had studied soul magic here. Before the Constellation Society appeared, this had been his secret base. Only he and Harry knew how to enter. He had carried out all manner of forbidden experiments within these walls. The chamber was built deep underground. Darkness was its theme. John's eyes saw in the dark, but he conjured a pale orb of light anyway. The orb hovered as he stepped toward the enormous statue. Inside the statue, there were 3 tiers. The first floor served as a studio, the second as an office, and the third held a small restricted section. John climbed to the second floor and let his fingers brush a silver skull ornament. A long box lay quietly nearby, empty within. He handled the skull, an alchemical device much like a pensieve, engraved with magic and a single phrase in an ancient tongue. Glory and light are indispensable. He turned the skull over absently and pushed open the ladder to the 3rd floor. The books there were the chamber's most carefully preserved treasures. The last heir had been Lord Voldemort. He had taken the most portable and dangerous artifacts when he'd left. John reached out, and one of the old volumes lifted from its shelf as if by habit. These books had formed the bones of his forbidden work once. Their arcana had been the foundation. He flipped through the pages, and the dense, obscure passages untangled themselves into simple clarity. His skill, even if it did not match Salazar Slytherin, was formidable. He flicked his hand, and several more books came free. Back on the 2nd floor, John set the books alight. Thick smoke coiled and drifted through the room. Holding the silver skull up, he watched it open its jaw and inhale the smoke. Green flame flared in its eye sockets, casting an eerie light. Within that glow, an image resolved. A man sat, bent over a volume, writing notes. Salazar Slytherin himself, or rather an image of him. Around the figure, the ruined shelves mended, candelabras reappeared, and the space seemed less ancient. The projection read like a page come to life. Salazar Slytherin did not look the wizened caricature of storybook illustrations. He was younger, his beard still black. He worked methodically, writing and experimenting, absorbed in research. John watched him and could not help the amused comment that slipped out. "No wonder they all say I'm like you." He touched his own hair and grinned wryly. "I won't end up bald too, will I?" he muttered. The image continued until the book's scene wound down and the projection faded. John found himself shaking his head a little. He had hoped to coax some remnant of Slytherin's consciousness with the display, but nothing remained, if it had ever been more than an echo at all. It was a small regret. Of the 4 founders, the one whose magical craft might have been deepest, Salazar Slytherin, was the first whose presence had been lost. "All right, whether you're here or not," John announced to the empty chamber, setting the skull down with a faint clack. "As a Slytherin, I should say a few words." He paced once, then looked up at the statue. "I learned much in your Chamber of Secrets. It helped me greatly." He spread his hands as if to include the room in an informal farewell. "Now I'm leaving this school. I never claimed the title of heir of Slytherin," he went on, "but as the King of Slytherin, I should pay my respects to the founder of this house." John laughed softly, a sound that was equal parts pride and fondness. "Glory to Slytherin," he said. "Slytherin seeks glory, wins glory, and guards glory. Great Salazar Slytherin, be proud." Chapter 623, John Wick appears in your Chamber of Secrets. John's voice echoed through the Chamber of Secrets. It was the fulfillment of his grand ambition to step into the magical world, the pride of the Second King, the aspiration of Slytherin. At last, the voice fell silent. Relief softened John's face. He was ready to leave. Stepping out of the statue, he walked along the dark passage and then stopped. "John Wick." He paused and drew a breath. A rustling sound came from behind him, and he wore a helpless look. "I did overlook one very important thing." Slowly, he turned back. The mouth of the statue he had entered was opening and closing. "I didn't look closely at this Chamber of Secrets," he muttered. It was Salazar Slytherin's statue. Of course, a great wizard who had understood magic would not have gone away in the usual sense. He had always been here. This statue was where Slytherin's consciousness resided. Gryffindor's great wooden sword, Ravenclaw's portrait, Hufflepuff's recipes, all the founders had placed fragments of themselves into objects. Salazar Slytherin had done the same with this statue. Now its mouth moved, and it said, "I have been watching you the whole time." "All right," John shrugged. "Great Salazar Slytherin, you didn't come out because of something I said, did you?" If that were the case, John thought, you'd be far too petty. The statue replied in a deep voice, "I watched your growth. You are very much like me. Both driven by magic, both devoted to family and friends," Slytherin continued. "I saw you study in ignorance and then learn. I watched you meet obstacles and find solutions. I saw how you created magic and touched the forbidden. In your countless experiments, you placed another Chamber of Secrets inside this Chamber of Secrets. I have always observed you. You are the most unusual person I have encountered." "We four founders imprinted our thoughts on the Sorting Hat," Slytherin said. "It is the fairest judge and the one that best understands our intentions. You seek an answer about yourself." John nodded. "Yes, I want to know." Many had speculated before. The statue said, "You are the most outstanding Slytherin. You are right, and I sense your ambition. You may not be glorified by Slytherin, but Slytherin will be proud of you." John could feel the awkwardness behind those words. Salazar Slytherin was proud. For him to sound almost humble was notable. The statue took a long breath and then earnestly pronounced, "John Wick, you are Slytherin." That was the answer. Many had said it before, but coming from Slytherin himself, it felt like validation. Validation of John's talent, his ambition, his pride. John asked, "You haven't come out all these years. Were you conflicted about my background?" Slytherin hesitated and then admitted, "I have been observing you to see if you were worthy of meeting me." John suspected the old founder was being tsundere, reluctant to acknowledge a Muggle born as legitimate heir. After all, Slytherin had stormed off after his quarrel with Gryffindor. The Chamber of Secrets itself had seemed like a petulant measure. Still, John smiled and bowed. "Great Slytherin, I accept your acknowledgement. Wait here," the statue intoned, "until the name John Wick rings through the world again." John looked up, ambition blazing in his eyes. No matter how reluctant Slytherin might be, he had acknowledged his ideal heir. The giant statue inclined its head slightly, approval unmistakable. "I will be proud of you, King of Slytherin." John left with Slytherin's acknowledgement in his heart. He would step into the wider magical world and become a king beyond the ivory tower. Chapter 639, Thoughts on Staying, Leaving School Dinner. The kitchens were a clatter of pots and pans. Hufflepuffs came out of the kitchen door, little badgers already salivating at the sight of potato dishes. The two biggest perks of being Hufflepuff were knowing first what was coming to eat and having access to late-night snacks. Advantages they weren't about to trade for the comforts of Gryffindor Tower. A few greedy students slipped a roll into their pockets as they headed down the corridor to the Great Hall, where the whole school assembled. Students from every house chatted about holiday plans. Seventh years talked about where they were going next. There were warm farewells and tearful goodbyes, and a few who seemed to be courting danger by tempting fate. After Malfoy got hoisted upside down once again, John shook his head. "Draco, you need to rein it in." If he was truly going into magical society, that temper wouldn't do. Malfoy, having been humbled by John's golden bell technique, shot back with characteristic arrogance. "Rein it in? They shouldn't be so blind as to provoke me." The young master of the Malfoy family, heir of an ancient line, his attitude made sense. In Hogwarts, where rules mostly held, it was tolerable to be restrained, but outside the school, status and identity mattered. For once, John found himself agreeing with Draco. In the wider world, the gap in status would become real. Slughorn tapped his cup and stood up. "Eat," he announced, plain and direct. John, savoring what would be his last meal at Hogwarts, carved a roast chicken with practiced ease, the knife flipping between his fingers so deftly it left the bones unmarked. The movement stunned Malfoy. "Why are you a wizard so good with these things?" he asked. A couple of burly boys, who remembered when John had once used a fork to pin another wizard's hand to the table, shivered at the thought. John ate slowly, glancing at the Great Hall's decorations, silver and green, the same as when he had first arrived. He had defended Slytherin's honor for 7 years, and that honor was now inseparable from the name John Wick. No one rushed this meal. The 7th years took their time, savoring the end of a tumultuous 7 years. Perhaps not the most exemplary class, but certainly among the most eventful in Hogwarts history. Malfoy was set for professional Quidditch. Neville planned to go to the forests of Albania. Daphne prepared to take on the family business. Each had a destination in mind. They laughed, planned, and imagined futures that might or might not come to pass. These 7 years had been the reason they'd fallen asleep on countless nights and woken determined the next morning. The meal ended before 8:30, like the end of any long chapter. John held a half-drunk iced lemonade and looked up at the staff table. Snape met his gaze across the hall. John raised his glass silently. Snape raised his cup in return. Their shared toast honored the few sentiments they had in common over the years. Snape had not been a great head of house for John. He was tied to Hogwarts by his own feelings, and his teaching often seemed designed to test only geniuses. But he had at times stood up for him. When suspicion fell upon John, Snape defended Slytherin's reputation. He is suited to conducting experiments, not to being imprisoned within an ivory tower. Chapter 624. John felt a pang of pity for the man trapped by love. He glanced toward the Gryffindor table. He had once been annoyed by the Sorting Hat's decision. His first friends had been there, the companions with whom he'd adventured. In time, though, they drifted apart. Harry intended to train as an Auror, Hermione was heading to the Ministry of Magic, and Ron, if the rumors were true, planned to open a shop like the Weasley twins. Ginny and Luna still had to finish school. Everything had changed, and at the same time, nothing had. When John's cup was empty, the banquet came to an end. Malfoy and Daphne shepherded the younger students toward their respective common rooms for the last time. John, however, went to the headmaster's office. Slughorn greeted him by opening a flagon of oak-aged mead. Before taking a sip, the professor gave it a careful sniff. "Ever since I was poisoned," Slughorn said with a wry smile, "I can't shake the habit." "Caution isn't a bad thing," John replied. He took the goblet from him and, without sniffing, drank straight away as if there were no need for ceremony. "This isn't the bottle I gave you." "I intend to keep your bottle," Slughorn laughed, extravagant and delighted. "A mead sent by the great Second King, such things should only come out on grand occasions." "I'll bet you 3 galleons you drink it tonight," John said, grinning. With Slughorn's taste for the finer things, he'd sooner swallow his hat than throw away good liquor. "You're on," Slughorn said with mock certainty. It wasn't just vanity. A gift from someone of John's stature was something Slughorn would treasure. The two of them felt less like student and principal and more like old friends. Slughorn settled back on the sofa and talked about John's future. "The international magical world is buzzing because of the elections," he said after a sip, smacking his lips. "I saw the gift from the Silver Hand in the papers. Wizards everywhere are praising you." "But there will be complications," he added, popping a candied jackfruit into his mouth. "With your strength now, some people won't be willing to accept it." As a Slytherin who loved collecting talented students, Slughorn's judgment carried weight. John's rise with the Silver Hand would inevitably upset an already small pie. In Britain, they'd been squeezed before. Now they were stepping into the international arena, and entrenched interests in other countries wouldn't stand idly by, especially in Germany, where the Minister of Magic's position was still being hotly contested. John swirled the wine in his cup and raised an eyebrow. It's the challenges that make things interesting. Then perhaps you should stay and teach here for another 2 years, Slughorn suggested. John wasn't joking. Hogwarts was a cradle for talent across nations. As a professor, he could shape generations. Dumbledore's many followers owed as much to his years at Hogwarts as to anything else. Even someone like Voldemort had coveted that position. The idea tempted John for a moment, but he was not Lord Voldemort. He had a family and a business empire to run. Teaching would have advantages, but it would also be a retreat from the responsibilities he'd built. My friends probably need me, John said with a shrug. Donating a sum to Hogwarts isn't a bad compromise. Slughorn beamed. John's little wizard fund overflowed. There was no shortage of worthy uses. The headmaster gladly accepted the idea, both because it would help the school and because Slughorn enjoyed the prestige of being able to introduce John's name around before he retired. John gave Slughorn a Merlin medal. In return, Slughorn offered him ongoing access to the best young talent. It was a comfortable exchange. As dawn brightened the sky, the school year at Hogwarts came to an end. Students streamed out of the castle. Their trunks had been sent to the train. Magic made travel easier than in the Muggle world. 2 owls, one black and one white, flew overhead. Tom wagged his tail and followed John. Hagrid came to see them off with Fang. Behind him, Grop waved clumsily. Luna passed by with a crumple-horned Snorkack, smiling and waving. Ding! Chapter 640. Mission complete. The King's graduation. Ding! Final mission of the Hogwarts stage complete. Task reward obtained. Magic blood +1. Any point 3. The Hogwarts Express steamed away from the platform. John watched it shrink into the distance and said softly, in his head, "Goodbye, Hogwarts." At platform 9, 3/4 families reunited. John stepped down, and from the carriage beside him, Sirius and 3 youngsters emerged. Sirius, true to his godfather duties, was delighted to hear Harry talk about becoming an Auror. James had once thought of that path too, before circumstances pushed him toward the Order of the Phoenix. Sirius proposed a visit to Silverhand Amusement Park before they returned to the Black family home so father and son could settle together. Strangely, Harry's relationship with the Dursleys had mellowed. After he left them, their hostility softened. The Dursleys' last Christmas gift had been a pair of socks instead of petty small change. Harry had even begun writing them letters. He'd grown. Mr. Weasley was there to collect his children, and John saw Percy among them. Since Mr. Weasley had a change of heart, his relationship with Percy had visibly improved. Percy stroked Ginny's hair. Ron hovered awkwardly, trying not to be noticed. Beside him was his fiancée, Penelope, a poised, bookish young woman. Percy nodded to John across the crowd. John returned the gesture. Malfoy walked toward Mrs. Malfoy. Mrs. Malfoy held her grown child close, eyes wet with relief. Lucius stood beside his wife, equally relieved he'd made the right choices. Their gazes met John's, and they bowed with warm, grateful respect. Mr. Greengrass emerged from behind the Malfoys. His look toward Malfoy was difficult to read. Astoria rushed into her father's arms. Daphne was more reserved. Mrs. Greengrass hugged her eldest daughter tenderly. Old Mrs. Longbottom pushed past, insisting she be the first to meet the pride of the Longbottom family. Mr. and Mrs. Longbottom stood aside smiling. That fierce old woman who had always urged Neville to be brave was proud of her grandson, the Lion of Longbottom, as others liked to call him. John took them all in as he walked across the platform. He saw his own family waiting. Watson looked around nervously. John was jostled, then a small blonde head burrowed into his arms. He stiffened a moment, then gently stroked Ariana's back. Mrs. Wick came forward, beaming at the sight of her children. Tom grumbled from the side. Ariana turned and reached to rub his chin. The spineless dog's tail wagged like a windmill. "Let's go home," Mrs. Wick said, brushing a strand of hair from John's cheek. John chuckled. Home. In every warm scene, there's one person who brings comic chaos. Watson launched into a breathless account of their trip to Budapest, supposed to be a simple survey for a hotel site, but turned into pandemonium. Cars were racing in broad daylight. One was driven by a minor. There was a lunatic with a bow and arrow, like some kind of duelist, shooting all sorts of crazy projectiles, Watson recounted. But he was tough. Getting hit by a car didn't faze him. How did Watson know? Because he'd been the one who hit him. Mrs. Wick laughed and didn't spare him. Your father got nervous and hit the accelerator instead of the brake, she said flatly. John looked at his father, who reddened. If you'd been driving a GTR, you'd already be in hospital, John said dryly. Watson looked chastened, and the group moved toward home, finally together. Chapter 625. His father always drove with an odd, unshakable confidence. Listening to his father's complaints all the way, the family finally made it home. John planned to stay a few days to finish the magic blood work. Ariana cheerfully handed him the drawings she'd been making lately. Who's this girl? He asked, glancing at the pictures. John was pleased to see Ariana improving. Staying with family had been the right choice. She needed to feel ordinary, not treated like a fragile project. Maybe Aberforth had influenced her. She'd taken to drawing. The painting was from Budapest, a town square, and a red-haired girl who looked about Ariana's age. John's brief look made Ariana frown. What's wrong? He asked. Mrs. Wick, standing nearby with a warm maternal smile, just watched. Women, she knew, could read other women. She could tell Ariana's first reaction wasn't admiration but a flash of jealousy. Still, Ariana pointed at the girl in the painting and said, Natasha. Natasha? John looked at his mother. Wasn't that her name? Mrs. Wick took a sip of black tea and laughed softly. That name's common where I'm from. Your father saved her. John remembered Watson going on and on about Budapest. Of course he was trying to boast about a heroic rescue. Watson had sped up at the right moment and saved the girl from an obsessed archer. Ariana knew the story too. They'd later met Natasha at the Budapest Grand Hotel. She'd been hurt, and Mrs. Wick had treated her. We stayed a month, Mrs. Wick said. Ariana and she became good friends. John smiled at Ariana's hopeful face. That's truly amazing, he said. You're a lot more impressive at 14 than I ever was. He had become the second king at 14 himself. No big deal, he thought. Ariana beamed, and the brown teddy on the sofa seemed to dance with her. The next day, John checked the obscurus inside Ariana. After several uses of soul potion, and with the Ravenclaw diadem's help, she had basically stabilized. If there were no major emotional upheavals, she could manage without the diadem. Anything that helped steady her mood was beneficial to her recovery. 2 golden star spirits had become her playmates. John hadn't been down to the basement in a while. He summoned the system panel and studied it. A large portion of it was gray. He had reached his limit. Magic blood, he muttered. He took out what might be the last usable vial of magic blood from his bag. There were several bottles of creature blood, and he hesitated over one in particular. It was labeled light and dark. Staring at the vial, John thought it through. In theory, it could give him substantial help. Given his current situation, there weren't many bloodlines that could assist. But this one carried risks. The darkness and dark arts on his own body might react badly, causing repulsion and doing more harm than good. After a long hesitation, he put the bottle back on the shelf and left the basement. In the living room, a shelf held 3 owls. Basil and Riddle perched there while the big-headed gray owl, Kiki, carefully hopped down. At that moment, Basil lifted a wing. Startled, Kiki slipped and nearly fell, but Basil wasn't attacking her. He flew toward the window, and as the owl in the branch was about to drop a letter, Basil shoved it out of the way and snatched the letter instead. He tilted his head and looked at Kiki with pure disdain. Fall over something so small, and you're supposed to be a dragon? Kiki could only accept her misfortune and pressed herself to the very edge of the shelf, trying to become invisible. Ariana watched the cat and mouse show on TV and chuckled as Tom, the cat, sulkily pawed the carpet twice. He was appalled that Ariana liked a strangely shaped feline with the same name as him. Not fair, his expression seemed to say. John took the letter, opened it, and his expression turned grave. Chapter 641, The Thief, the Hero, Poland. Inside the Silverhand Johnny shop, Tangmi stared at the man who had broken into the store. For some reason, the thief showed no fear of capture. He even kept his head raised, as if proud. Stealing from Silverhand Johnny was foolishness. Tangmi sneered. He had plenty of men to deal with troublemakers. He glanced at the 2 employees and asked coldly, "How did he get in? It looks like he's been here before." Silverhand Johnny has anti-theft wards. Unless someone opened the door for him, one of the staff answered. Tang Mi stepped closer to the kneeling man, bent down and said with a smirk, "Tell me, and I may be lenient." The man only laughed. He struggled twice, but a werewolf security guard held him down. The man spat in Tang Mi's direction and said icily, "Ruthless capital." Tang Mi shrugged off the insult and in a flash of temper slapped him across the face. Teeth and blood flew. The prisoner glared back defiantly. "What did he take?" Tang Mi asked the employees casually. He stole the of series, one stammered. And a lot of food. Food? Tang Mi raised an eyebrow. He hadn't expected someone to come to Silverhand Johnny to steal food. The captive closed his eyes and waited for Tang Mi's decision. Tang Mi stared at him for a long moment and then said, "Send him to the Ministry of Magic. Let the Auror department handle it." If this had been anywhere else, the man might have been taught a lesson on the spot. But on another's turf, Tang Mi chose to let the authorities take over. The security guards from Silverhand Johnny escorted the man to the door and led him outside. People milled and then fell silent. "What's going on?" Tang Mi asked, puzzled. One of the guards forced a tight smile. "Look outside." Tang Mi's face darkened as he stepped outside. The shop's perimeter was completely surrounded by a crowd of Polish wizards and witches who blocked every exit. Their faces were full of anger. "Give us back our hero," someone shouted. The crowd grew louder and more chaotic. Tang Mi was bewildered. When had he offended a hero? But when the captured man was brought forward, the crowd exploded. "You can't do this. Let Divala go, you barbaric foreigners. Damned capital." They began hurling things at Silverhand Johnny. Tang Mi drew his wand and deflected some of the projectiles, then used a sonorous charm and announced, "This man broke into Silverhand Johnny to steal. Please step back." "No, we won't leave," they shouted. The surge of voices pushed Tang Mi back toward the shop. He retreated step by step until he was forced inside. His face was uncertain. What exactly had he missed? After pressing the witnesses and several inquiries, the truth came out. The man had been stealing from Silverhand Johnny for days, but instead of keeping the goods, he distributed them to poor wizards. For many Polish wizards, he had become a folk hero. Word that Silverhand Johnny had captured him spread fast and riled the crowd. It framed the shop as another example of capital exploiting the common people. Furious and protective, they had come to demand his release. Someone is orchestrating all of this. Tang Mi felt the trap tightening. He was the victim, yet among the Polish wizards he had been cast as the oppressor. Theft had been reframed as justice. The one who'd been stolen from had become the villain. What kind of logic was that? He swore silently. Now he had two choices: release the man or hand him over to the Ministry of Magic. Either way, the public image of him as an oppressor was already fixed. Letting the man go would only encourage the crowd to think Silverhand could be bullied with impunity. But if he insisted on keeping him detained, the mob would not relent. It was a vicious dilemma, and it stank of manipulation. The sudden image of the Minister of Magic popped into his mind. The ministry's counterattack had arrived. He refused to believe these people had stumbled onto his arrest by accident. Then a guard shouted, "Mr. Shelby, there's trouble outside. Silverhand Johnny's under attack." The security guard's face drained. He and the others looked out. A furious crowd had gathered and were pelting the gate with stones. "Release our hero," they cried. "You oppressors deserve to die." Tang Mi forced himself to stay calm. If someone was stirring up trouble, he didn't need to play into it. "Contact the Ministry of Magic," he told a clerk. "Tell them we're under attack." The clerk hurried off. Soon, ministry personnel arrived. The inspection department. "Stand back, everyone. Step away. We are here to keep the peace," they called. Tang Mi wanted to laugh at the irony. From start to finish, Silverhand Johnny had been the one being bullied, and yet these officials came declaring they were there to protect him. The crowd was pacified enough for Aurors to form a barrier. A tall Auror, with a hint of triumph in his eyes, approached, offered his hand, and said, "Star Rosier." "Tang Mi Shelby," Tang Mi replied, shaking it. He took in the scene. "I'm curious," he said flatly, "how a thief becomes a hero." "There's been a misunderstanding," Star replied, looking troubled. "This is about—" A rock from the crowd struck Tang Mi on the head before Star could finish. "Stop!" Star bellowed. Anyone who lays a hand on Mr. Shelby will be detained. That shut down the immediate violence, but the grumbling continued. Star pivoted, changing his tone to one of contrition, and lowered himself in front of the crowd. "I apologize," he said loudly enough for the mob to hear. "Divala entered Silverhand Johnny without permission and caused a disturbance." "That's not true," Tangmi said calmly, his Auror instincts cutting through the rhetoric. "He didn't merely enter without permission. He entered to steal. He committed theft at Silverhand Johnny and caused property loss." "We will handle it," Star assured him solemnly. "We will give Silverhand Johnny a satisfactory explanation." A chorus of boos rose. The crowd wasn't satisfied. Tangmi signaled to the security guards to bring Divala out. As the crowd parted, the smear of slaps across Divala's face was visible, and it only fueled their ire. Star motioned for his men to take charge of escorting Divala. He stepped up to the man and pronounced, "Because of the losses you caused Silverhand Johnny, we will escort you to prison." Then he turned to Tangmi with a practiced smile. "Are you satisfied, Mr. Shelby?" Tangmi gave him a long look. "I hope justice is done." "Of course." Star's face didn't change. He ordered the crowd to disperse. Two Aurors fell in behind Divala and started to move through the throng. As they passed an alley, one of them leaned in and hissed, "Run." Divala shoved past the two Aurors and darted into the alley. The crowd erupted in cheers. The Aurors, after two perfunctory steps in pursuit, sheepishly reemerged and announced, "Divala escaped." The cheering swelled, some even applauding. Star rebuked his subordinates in a staged fashion and then turned to Tangmi with a mock apology. "I'm sorry, my men are useless." He leaned forward and in a voice meant only for Tangmi, chuckled, "But they're excellent at catching greedy capitalists." Tangmi understood. The whole episode had been engineered by the ministry. The law would not punish the masses. Those wizards who had assaulted Silverhand Johnny would go unpunished. A few days later, the entrance of Silverhand Johnny was again under siege. A report arrived that made Tangmi curse out loud. Damn! Divala was dead. At his own home. Everyone he'd fed believed Silverhand Johnny was responsible. The tipping point came when someone claimed to have seen two Silverhand employees near Divala's house. The narrative snapped into place. The capitalists had killed the people's hero. The crowd demanded justice. Stones shattered the shop's windows. "Cowards, if you've got the guts, come out," someone yelled. Nothing in the storefront's panes was left intact as rocks and bricks kept coming. They vented their fury, and Tangmi knew, with bitter certainty, that someone had set this in motion. Star sent a sycophantic letter asking whether the ministry should step in to disperse the mob. Tangmi balled the letter up and crushed it into his fist. Chapter 642, Money Ideals. How do you fool a crowd? It's simple. Make them see their own powerlessness, then make them see others enjoying privileges they don't have. Jealousy does the rest. It turns a group reckless. A thief becomes a hero if his theft can be framed as robbing the rich to feed the poor. Evidence doesn't matter, only testimony and the story people want to believe. They attack Silverhand Johnny because they wear the mantle of the oppressed. "We are the weak, we should be helped," they cry. "You are Silverhand, you are capital, you have wealth we don't, so you owe us." It's intoxicating to do wrong in the name of righteousness. The thrill of opposing authority makes them feel heroic. By the time John saw the papers, the Silverhand affair had exploded across the headlines. The true face of Silverhand, killing the hero who helped the common people. First Waterloo, Silverhand capital intervention fails, Polish public protests en masse. Poland has betrayed its own goodwill. Silverhand Johnny under attack. The attacker is Barty Crouch's regret. He should not have allowed Silverhand into Poland. John's expression darkened as he read. "Looks like this holiday won't be easy," he said, fingers smoothing the rough newsprint. The move was a counterattack. The other side using the affair to prove a point, that ideals could inflame people just as easily as money could sway them. They'd elevated the conflict into a moral battle, capital versus ideals, silver coins versus righteousness, and had painted Silverhand as pure evil. "A thief," John murmured, a faint smile curling his lips. A very clever move. Nobody seemed to remember that the so-called hero had been a thief who'd slipped into a shop to steal. They chose to focus only on the food he'd taken, forgetting that he'd also stolen items from the Of series. People see only what they want to see. The affair had rattled old Barty and reignited public opinion. The Polish Ministry of Magic stepped in. Minister Ing himself spoke with a sorrowful gravity. I believe in Silverhand, and I believe in Mr. Crouch. The ministry will fully investigate the truth behind Davala's death. Chapter 627. Only a minister with that kind of force could make the people of Poland fall in line. But Silverhand had found itself in an awkward position. It was supposed to revive Poland's economy. Instead, it had been stalled by vandalism it never expected. The Minister of Magic talked about trust with a face that betrayed nothing but strained endurance. People began to wonder whether Silverhand's influence in the countries where it operated had actually reached that high. It was John Wick's turn to respond. 3 days after the smashing incident, Silverhand reopened. Polish wizards sneered, convinced it was wishful thinking. Then a newspaper fell from the sky. A wizard picked it up and read aloud. A closer look at the Polish Silverhand incident. Silverhand's Little Wizard Fund. The name Silverhand may not be widely known abroad, but here it has become synonymous with charity. Since Silverhand's founding, there has been a fund, the Little Wizard Fund. The Little Wizard Fund began because of John Wick's concern for the cursed. He created it to provide free wolfsbane potion to every underage werewolf. As Silverhand grew, the fund's remit expanded. It now covers funding for Hogwarts education. Beginning last year, freshmen at Hogwarts can receive a 50% discount on required materials each year. For young wizards who cannot afford to attend due to family hardship, the Little Wizard Fund supports them through to graduation. Because of this fund, persecution driven by the curse has declined. Silverhand expresses regret for the recent events in Poland and has mobilized the fund to safeguard every Polish child wizard, taking responsibility for building dormitories for their use. However, Silverhand's Polish branch recently discovered thefts from the Little Wizard Fund. After investigation, the perpetrators were arrested and handed over to the Ministry of Magic. To avoid panic, the losses were initially concealed. The wizard read the report aloud, his gaze fixed on the words Little Wizard Fund. Everyone who saw the newspaper reacted the same way. People could die for their ideals, but people also had attachments. Family was the strongest of those attachments. Funding schooling, treating curses, the Little Wizard Fund touched every area where Silverhand and John Wick operated. And what had the Vandals done? They smashed Silverhand, jeopardizing the future of Poland's children. Some scoffed, some doubted, some half-believed. Then that afternoon, a hesitant child arrived at Silverhand Johnny. Poverty had taught him self-consciousness and shame. He couldn't bring himself to look up at the woman at the reception desk. I want to ask about the Little Wizard Fund, he stammered. The woman smiled. For applications, go to the window in the second room. He did. A young man processed his request. When he came away, the boy held the scholarship, only 100 galleons, and a little wizard card that could not be duplicated. He deposited the money onto the card and converted it into points that granted a 50% discount. It felt unreal. When the boy finally collected himself, he ran breathlessly to his friend's house, urging him to get a little wizard card too. The news spread like wildfire through wizarding families in Poland. Who wouldn't want their children to have a better life? War had widened the gap between rich and poor everywhere. The majority were poor. A 50% discount on schooling was gold. People flocked to claim the scholarships. For the first time, many believed the Little Wizard Fund was real. That night, former vandals quietly tidied up the mess they had made at Silverhand Johnny. By morning, the storefront was cleaner and more conspicuous than any other on the street. Wizards who had resisted Silverhand were bewildered. This wasn't an empty promise. This was real help. The death of Davala started to fade from conversations. When someone tried to bring it up, others would steer away from the subject. This was John Wick's counterattack. He wanted people to see that Davala hadn't saved them, he had damaged them. A little food now, he seemed to say. Sorry, you can get more. Money versus ideals. You can believe in a spiritual future painted by revolution, that today's sacrifices will deliver a better tomorrow. But why wait for the future when the present can feed you? John Wick set the newspaper down in Wick and smiled wryly. Let the idealists print distorted facts, he said. I can pay to have the truth written for me. Money flowed like water, and John Wick was untroubled. Large sums mean nothing unless they're spent usefully. Why complicate things when money could solve the problem? Thinking of those who would rather starve for their ideals than utter a word against them, he stroked his chin. Sometimes I feel like the villain, he mused, then laughed. It looked exactly like a group of people confronting capital and the capitalist's boss buying off the hesitant with benefits. John Wick was amused. Chapter 643, Night Fairy, No Return. For a while, wizards had been hunted, so there were still a few hiding places in their old gathering spots. A small boat slipped along the river to one such place. A young man stepped ashore, hood up, and secured the boat with a hard expression. You again? An old wizard smoking a pipe called out, smiling. What are you buying this time? The young man glanced around at the friendlier faces on the street. Get me some food, he said, handing over a list. Also, flobberworm right front claw nails and dittany. That's quite a list, the old man muttered as he took it. The young man snatched the list back and was about to move off when the old man hurried after him. Hey, I can get them. No one else can. The young man stopped and said coldly, If you don't want the business, there are plenty of others who will. The old man opened his mouth to grumble, but the young man's impatience stopped him. Old rules. Pick it up this afternoon, he conceded. The old man watched him go, then chuckled and handed the list to his studious grandson. Take the little wizard card and buy it at Silver Hand, he instructed. The money's for studying, the boy objected reluctantly. Go, the old man snapped. What's the use of all that studying if you're starving? Money is the only hard truth. Make more money, make your life better. He sent the boy off. Since Silver Hand started issuing the little wizard card, the old man had been doing this, sending his grandson to buy scarce items, then reselling them at 80% of the usual price. Between errands and resale, he turned a tidy 30% profit. A quiet little opportunity, and he told his grandson to keep it secret. The grandson went into Silver Hand Johnny. The store that had recently been attacked now hummed with customers. Little wizards queued at the checkout with their cards. The boy methodically picked the items on the list, but one request gave him trouble. Dittany was a common potion ingredient available at alchemy shops. Flobberworm right front claw nails, however, were rare in potion stores. Hesitantly, he approached a clerk. Excuse me, do you sell flobberworm right front claw nails? You again? The clerk smiled. They're in the alchemy materials section. You've been buying a lot lately. The boy mumbled thanks and hurried off. The clerk watched him go, then called to the shop floor. Tangmi walked out, and the clerk reported in a low voice, Shelby, I think someone's profiting off the little wizard card. Tangmi, called Shelby by the staff, raised an eyebrow. Oh, what makes you say that? The clerk pointed out the boy's repeated purchases and the odd items on his list. Tangmi listened, then nodded thoughtfully. Go back to work, he said, but he didn't return to the counter. Instead, he followed the boy toward the alchemy materials section. Little wizards hardly ever ventured into that aisle. It was usually adults who needed those supplies. In a store that size, a lone child among the shelves was easy to spot. Chapter 628, Tangmi trailed behind him in silence. The boy didn't notice. His eyes were fixed on the list in his hand. He looked up and realized the cat-like creature's right claw nail was too high. He couldn't reach it. He had to stand on tiptoe, stretching his fingers closer. After several failed attempts, he grew dejected. Tangmi stepped forward, plucked the claw nail down, glanced at the boy and asked, You want this? The boy thanked him over and over. Just as he reached for it, Tangmi pulled his hand back and, pretending to think it over, said, This is a rare alchemy ingredient. Are you sure you shouldn't check the list first? The boy fell for it and produced the list to study it carefully. Tangmi reached out and snatched the parchment away. The boy was startled and tried to grab it back. Dittany, cat-like creature's right claw nail? He stammered, glancing down the shopping list. Besides those two items, there were other medicinals and odd foods, some perishable, some ordered in quantities no child could eat. After noting everything, Tangmi said with feigned concern, Everything on this list is here, but we're out of wetland raisins. On hearing that, the boy hurriedly checked the list again. Grandpa said everything on the list has to be bought, he said sadly. He'll scold me so badly. Tangmi shrugged and spread his hands. There's nothing I can do. He watched the boy leave, then casually signaled a shop assistant. Put away the wetland raisins, he told the assistant, who obeyed. Tangmi watched the boy go, frowning. Those items looked either rare or unavailable elsewhere. He went to check the boy's purchase records. Purchases made with a young wizard card are backed up. Each card has a unique number and name for easy lookup, a safeguard against fraud. Tangmi found something wrong. The boy's recent purchases were all medical supplies, and they had one thing in common. The materials were rare. Only Silver Hand might have access to them. Someone was using the boy. But why? He tapped the parchment and the notes hovered into view. Some healing ingredients could be low profile, but they had deliberately chosen rare materials available only through Silver Hand, expensive and attention-grabbing. Someone wanted them discovered by him. Understanding sunk in. Tangmi left the shop and saw the boy heading toward another stall for wetland raisings. He almost followed, but stopped himself, acting as if nothing was amiss, and returned to the shop. He considered the people around, then instructed a trusted subordinate to watch the boy whenever he came to buy things. The little boy brought the purchases home. His grandfather beamed until his eyes disappeared into slits, until he learned the wetland raisins had been bought at normal price. The old man scowled in anger. The boy protested. He didn't have any left. What a lousy shop, they don't even have everything, the old man grumbled. By afternoon, the hooded young man who had gone out earlier returned. He approached the house to collect the items. The old man, feigning concern, tried to be coy. The things you want are rare. You don't know how much effort it took me. The young man, impatient, snapped. What do you want? Add some money, the old man said greedily, like a niffler. The young man sneered. Are you taking me for a fool? The wetland raisins were hard to find, the old man insisted. The young man's expression shifted at the implication. Were the raisins from somewhere else? The old man, oblivious, bragged about his effort. The young man didn't want to listen, went inside, grabbed the supplies, and tossed a bag of money over. The old man turned away like a thief and chuckled as he counted it. Back on the boat, the young man produced a wand and waved it. The ropes untied and the boat drifted downstream. Dusk fell. They passed beneath an arch bridge. 2 wizards walked overhead. Beyond the bridge, the boat stopped at a hidden hideout shrouded in vegetation. The young man brought the supplies inside. The small boat began to sink and was soon swallowed by the dark water. The place inside was sparsely furnished, though recent signs of life were evident. He set the dittany aside and threw the wetland raisins into a cauldron. Removing his hood and laying down his wand, he tugged at his hair and muttered, "You really can sleep." After stirring the potion for a while, he opened the jar of dittany and crossed to the only bed. Someone lay there. He picked up a small silver knife and cut away the bandages. Then he sprinkled dittany onto the bleeding wound. Blood flowed steadily. He watched for a long moment and then set the knife aside. "We're lucky," he said softly. Silver Hand noticed. He drew a needle and thread and began suturing. The necrotic tissue had already been removed. "Soon we'll be able to finish the mission," he told the still figure. His vision blurred slightly, and he remembered one more task. He placed his hand at his neck, rubbed, then lifted a strip of adhesive skin. Carefully, slowly, he peeled it away. A layer of false skin came off his face. "Thanks to good grades in Muggle studies, I learned a novel trick," he murmured. Putting the skin aside, a familiar face emerged. He instinctively reached into his pocket and cursed under his breath. "Forgot I ran out of cigarettes." Wiping the last adhesive from his features, the face everyone knew appeared. The missing auror? Rippy Cabayer. He set the cauldron to cool. After finishing the sutures, Rippy sat down, picked up a piece of bread and stuffed it in his mouth, then clicked his tongue at the man on the bed. "The famous healer Gaussy," he said. "If I hadn't checked your records, I wouldn't have bothered to save you." Rippy wasn't dead. He had nearly died, but he'd used a clever way to evade pursuit. The unlucky ministry employee whose identity Rippy had taken became a scapegoat. Rippy had fled to where that unconscious employee lay, cut off the man's face, because polyjuice can't be made from a dead person's hair. and used his clothing and identity as cover. He'd spent time in the Muggle world. If he hadn't seen Grindelwald's corpse, he might not have thought of this escape so quickly. Using the stolen identity, he had slipped back into the Ministry to continue his investigation. He opened a battered notebook filled with names and positions from the Polish Ministry of Magic. Next to each name, a symbol marked his findings. "I didn't expect the infiltration to be so deep," Rippy murmured, narrowing his eyes. He hadn't gone back to Britain. He'd stayed and kept digging, partly because he wanted a promotion, partly because the original identity came from the Black Zone, an unregulated area that made secret work easier. "Star Rosier," he read aloud, tracing the name. From the evidence, Star hadn't been replaced. He'd chosen his side himself. That realization made Rippy uneasy. When had Grindelwald first set eyes on Inge Griffiths? Turning to the last page, two names remained: Bart Schmidt, marked as deceased, and Inge Griffiths, listed as missing. Rippy had stayed for another reason, to find the real Inge. If Grindelwald had assumed his identity, he had either killed him or hidden him. Either way, finding Inge would be a way to strike back. "Clueless masses," Rippy muttered, "and Grindelwald, you'll feel the backlash." He finished his bread, and a groan came from the bed. The patient stirred. "Great," Rippy said, moving the cauldron nearer. "I almost thought you were gone." Gaucy blinked and came to. He felt as if he'd already died. The cursed blade had pierced his heart. Surviving that seemed impossible. His memory stopped at falling into the water and then drifting. "I think I remember someone pulling me out," he said weakly, the pain in his chest making him groan. "How can a dead man still feel pain?" "You're awake. Drink the potion," someone said in his ear. Gaucy asked, "Musashi?" But the only reply was a mouthful of bitter, fishy-tasting potion poured down his throat. He choked then, to his surprise, swallowed to the bottom. He lay back, listless, staring at the ceiling, wondering at the strangeness of surviving at all. Chapter 6:10-29. He turned his head and saw Rippy's impish smile. "I don't think we need introductions, do we?" Rippy recognized Gaucy, not just because Gaucy was on the wanted list, but because they'd tangled before. The famous alchemist had been working for payback then, and the young Auror Rippy had given him a hard time. Gaucy scrutinized him and hesitated. "Why don't you introduce yourself?" Gaucy clearly wasn't taking him seriously. Rippy's smile stiffened. He drew a breath and forced a grin. "Rippy Kabayer, head of the Auror training class. Good day, fugitive Gaucy." As someone wanted in several countries, Gaucy registered the implication. "Oh, so you're from the Ministry of Magic." He touched his chest. The blade that had pierced him was gone, replaced by a nasty centipede-like stitch scar. Ugh! Suddenly a memory hit him, and he clutched his head, writhing on the bed. Rippy blinked. "What's wrong?" Gaucy moaned, scrambling across the bed as if it hurt more than any wound. His money was gone. That loss felt worse than death. He grabbed Rippy's hand, startling him into reflexively lifting the blade that had nearly killed Gaucy. "Tell me, is there still a chance to get it back?" He looked at Rippy with desperate hope. If his boss didn't know, maybe he could take it back. But Rippy only regarded him with pity. "I don't think so. Too much time has passed." Gaucy's eyes rolled back, and he collapsed, fainting. When the potion brewed and cooled for the second time, Gaucy came to, staring blankly at the ceiling. "Tell me this is a dream. Gurgle." Before he could finish, another potion was shoved into his mouth. After that ordeal of forced feedings, he staggered into silence. The Auror and the fugitive sat facing each other without words. Gaucy's slack expression made Rippy worry he might faint again. After a long pause, Gaucy finally gathered himself. "So we're still in Poland?" Learning they were still in Poland didn't anger him. He sounded resigned. "What are you doing here?" Rippy brightened. He produced a notebook and handed it to Gaucy. "I'm working for Minister Crouch. You're linked to the Silver Hand. Our interests don't clash." "I've already looked into the Polish Ministry of Magic," Rippy went on eagerly. "If we can find the real Inge Griffiths, everything falls into place." He hoped that helping with such a big case would boost his career. Gaucy took the notebook, skimmed it, and then pushed it back with a zen-like calm. "I've already retired." "Retired? When did that happen?" Rippy was baffled. He'd waited for Gaucy to wake up, only to hear this. Gaucy folded his hands. "The moment I fell into the water." "You mean the day you went bankrupt?" Rippy said flatly. A crack showed in Gaucy's composed face. He couldn't help a twitch. Rippy's eyes softened. What do you have left after retiring? Nothing. Gaucy's voice was quiet. Half a life of work and not a single galleon left. Don't be silly. You must have something. Gaucy reached into his pockets. He looked stunned. He'd always been careful to keep money on him. Rippy shrugged and smirked. Sorry, your money's gone. You, clever, lively, adorable. Gaucy started to curse, then froze when Rippy flicked the bloody blade into view. As the man whose life had almost been taken, he backed down. Money could be earned back. Life couldn't. Regaining his composure, Gaucy smiled. How can I help? I'll search the ministry, Rippy said. You search the residences. Together we'll find them. Does this look like a Muggle movie? Are you asking me to make a comeback? Gaucy snapped. I almost died, and you want me to go back? Rippy leveled the bloody blade at him in silence. Gaucy calmed. Let's be clear, I'll help, but I won't work for free, he bargained. Oh, what do you want? Rippy asked, setting the blade on the table. Money, Gaucy said flatly. No problem, Rippy replied with the confidence of someone with connections. Name your price. 5,000 galleons. 5,000! Rippy gaped and picked the blade back up. Are you joking? Who could afford that? It was my last mission's pay, Gaucy said evenly, patting the number by a couple thousand. If you don't believe me, ask my boss. Rippy scowled but thought 5,000 might be doable through official channels if he pressed the right buttons. He forced a strained smile. You won't refuse to repay me for saving your life? One thing at a time, Gaucy said. You saved me once. I'll save you next time. You can take my life, but you cannot take my money. Rippy inhaled, annoyed but pragmatic. Payment on completion. No deposit? Gaucy sneered. That's not proper. Say another word and I'll throw you in the river outside. Rippy raised the blade. He was the one in charge. Chapter 645, Fred's Wedding. Lively John had thought he'd attend Percy's wedding first. Instead, the first Weasley to marry was Fred. An owl had delivered the invitation, and John was surprised. He never imagined Fred would be first to wed. If you asked which Weasley was the most mischievous, it would be Fred. Even George had seemed slightly more mature. That Fred should tie the knot before his older brothers was truly unexpected. John had assumed Fred would remain carefree for several more years. His bride was also a familiar face, Angelina Johnson, former Gryffindor Quidditch captain. She was brave and skilled. The match was surprising, but somehow fitting. John set the invitation down and glanced at the poor owl Pigwidgeon, cornered against the wall by Basil. Fred had apparently borrowed Ron's owl to send notices, and Basil was not impressed. If John hadn't told Basil to hold back, Pigwidgeon would probably have lost half its feathers by now. He wrote a reply and entrusted it to the little bird. There were always dried fish in the attic drawer. John pulled 2 and offered them to Pigwidgeon. The owl hesitated when it noticed Basil's stare. Then, after some internal debate, set one fish down and nudged it toward Basil in a bid to pacify the pet. Basil nodded contentedly, and Pigwidgeon flew off. John watched his birds with a resigned expression. You weren't always like this, he murmured, picking up Basil. Has something changed? Basil flapped its wings in what looked like annoyance. John put it down and went downstairs, where Ariana was doing something similar. She had Kiki by the foot and was shaking the plump creature angrily. What's wrong, Ariana? John asked. Kiki ate my cookies, she complained. John's eyes widened. A dragon, no matter how small, stealing cookies? Kiki defended itself with a pitiful look. I didn't want to, it seemed to say. I've only had salad for a month. John stroked Ariana's hair and smiled. Give it the cookies. I'll take you somewhere nice to eat. Ariana instantly dropped Kiki and forgot about the cookie box. Kiki wept with relief. It trusted its king. John had always been good to it. Grateful, Kiki hid the cookies behind the sofa and ate them like someone afraid they might be taken away. Chapter 630. Tom passed by and glanced over, not understanding why an owl could be so delighted by a pile of cookies. John looked at the beaming Ariana, and Fred had no reason to refuse bringing guests along. Bringing someone with them shouldn't be a problem. He still had a few gifts to pick out, and John told Tom, "We'll be back a little later today." Tom wagged his tail, hoping to go too. John rubbed the dog's head. Sadly, he had no intention of taking him. How should we get there? John thought for a moment, then turned to Ariana. Do Do you want to try the night bus? Ariana tilted her head. She had never heard of the night bus. There was nothing like it in her era. As John and Ariana left, John immediately felt at least a dozen pairs of eyes on them. They're all watching Dad, he thought, recognizing exactly who they were. He led Ariana out with a neutral expression. On Crescent Street, he sensed someone following them. With a casual flick of his wrist, a gust of wind swirled up and blinded the pursuers with dust. When they looked again, the pair had vanished. In truth, John hadn't moved. He'd used a confundus charm to make them think he was gone. He raised his wand, and in an instant, a 3-story purple bus screeched up and stopped before them. The acne-faced conductor popped the door open and began his routine introduction. Then his eyes went wide. Good heavens, John Wick! Stan Shunpike shrieked, the second king of the wizarding world, in person. He rushed over, fawning all the way, ignoring the graceful Ariana at his side. No doubt he would be boasting about knowing the second king the next time he tried to pick up someone at a pub. The night bus deposited them at the Leaky Cauldron. It's an honor to serve you, Stan said, doffing his hat with exaggerated respect. Mr. Wick. John inclined his head slightly and led the curious Ariana inside. There he found Hannah being shown the ropes by the owner, getting familiar with the business. Hannah, John? Hannah was pleasantly surprised. It hadn't even been a week since they'd last seen each other at Hogwarts. When she spotted Ariana, she blinked in confusion. This is my sister, Ariana Wick, John introduced. This is Hannah Abbott. I didn't even know you had a sister, Hannah said, looking at Ariana with a little envy. She was not only beautiful, but the sister of the second king besides. Ariana tucked herself behind John and peeked out shyly. Hello? Hello, Ariana? Is she a witch? Hannah asked John. John nodded and smiled. Yes, and I hope you can keep the place cleaner. Hannah rolled her eyes. She'd been annoyed by the Leaky Cauldron's lack of cleanliness for some time. They didn't linger. John soon led Ariana into Diagon Alley. As they walked, Ariana's nervousness in the unfamiliar surroundings eased. Everywhere they went, people greeted John respectfully as Mr. Wick. Ariana was given many little gifts: a golden snitch souvenir from Quidditch Quality Goods, a new flavor of ice cream from Florian Fortescue's, and a case of liquor from the Silver Hand Cellar. When they were ready, they made for the burrow. The burrow was buzzing. The Weasleys were proud to have the second king's family in attendance. Relatives gathered from far and wide, and people from Mrs. Stahl, Weasley's maternal side, were there too. Harry and his friends had come. Before John even arrived, he spotted Luna in one of her eccentric outfits and Mr. Lovegood nearby. Fred, unusually solemn, wore a tailcoat that made him look like a hotel attendant, both amusing and a little embarrassing. Percy stood with Penelope at his side, smiling. He was genuinely happy for his younger brother. There were too many guests for the house, so tents had been set up in the field. George and Mr. Weasley stood at the entrance to greet arrivals. George and Fred wore matching tailcoats. George bounded over with damped enthusiasm. "Oh, Mr. John Wick," he said with mock solemnity. "Do you need my assistance, sir?" "Roll out the red carpet, now," John replied dryly. The twins were the twins. John gave George a sideways look. "Don't tell me you're doing your who am I routine again." George laughed awkwardly. John shook his head. "I hope whoever gets pranked this time isn't too angry." He swept his gaze across the crowd and spotted Dumbledore speaking quietly with an elderly woman whose back was turned. Ron, as usual the younger brother, had been conscripted as an improvised waiter. Aunt Muriel loved to boss him around. Harry looked well turned out, like a proper member of his family. Luna spotted John and waved. "This is my sister, Ariana Wick," John said by way of introduction. Ariana stared at Luna's odd attire and the glittering sequins. Her curiosity matched Luna's warm interest. The two took to each other quickly. Luna had an uncanny way of sensing what Ariana felt. "Ariana? Albus, I think I heard Ariana," Luna said, catching Dumbledore's attention. "Madam Bagshot?" she added, nodding toward the elderly woman. John watched as the woman talking with Dumbledore turned around. Age had settled on her face, and her hair was pure white. She wore a woolen shawl. John recognized her at once, the woman who used to love reading, Bathilda Bagshot. Bathilda's eyes clouded for a moment in disbelief. "I think I misheard, Albus," she murmured. Dumbledore smiled gently and encouraged her to enjoy herself. She wasn't one to go out much, and if not for the wedding invitation from the Weasleys, she probably wouldn't have come at all. Suddenly, Bathilda rubbed her eyes as if they troubled her. "What's the matter?" Dumbledore asked, leaning in with concern. Bathilda kept rubbing them. "I think my eyes are failing me, Albus," she said. She stared off in one direction blankly. "I feel as though I've seen someone I know." Dumbledore followed her gaze but said nothing. He rose and walked past, knowing John preferred not to be disturbed. "Albus?" Bathilda called after him, but it was too late. John came over and sat on the opposite bench from Bathilda. "Hello, child," she said weakly. She couldn't yet place the face. John smiled at the old woman who had once helped him through his hardest times. "Hello, my name is John Wick." "Wick?" Bathilda's face brightened inexplicably at the name. "I remember another. He was a good boy. His name was—" Her expression faltered. The name and the face wouldn't come. "Yoel," John said. He reached for Bathilda's wrinkled hand and held it gently. "His name was Yoel Wick." "Yoel? Yoel!" In the hazy corners of Bathilda's memory, a figure began to coalesce. A white-haired boy who had once fixed her leaky roof and turned it into a skylight. The pitiful boy who had left. The image sharpened, and the warmth that spread from John's hand to the old woman's palm unlocked something. The white-haired boy's face slid into place, and then, as if an overlay, the black-haired boy standing before her aligned with that memory. Bathilda's lips formed the name. "Yell." "I'm here," John said softly. "You said we would meet again." Bathilda looked at him with complex emotion, then down at their joined hands, one old, one young. A smile creased her face. For someone who had become dulled by time, it was a bright, happy smile. "I'm an old woman now, child," she said, patting his hand. "You're still as young as ever." Bathilda reached out and touched John's cheek. "Your eyes are better, but you look heartbroken," she said. John didn't pull away. His eyes trembled for a moment, then he managed a small smile. "I'm growing up, madam. You're the one who's old." For an instant it felt as if they had been swept back 100 years, to the awkward Bathilda of long ago and the white-haired, blind boy she had known. Bathilda's voice softened. "This reunion has been a long time coming." Something in John changed in a blink. It took only seconds to unlock the memories, but he carried the weight of a century of waiting. The old woman's emotion was almost physical. It brought tears to his eyes. "I'm very happy to see you again," he said quietly. "As am I." In Bathilda's mind, 2 other boys stood beside the white-haired child, except now they were old men. Their reunion had been delayed by Fred's wedding, but the interruption only added to the laughter. Fred's boisterous personality matched the scene perfectly. Mrs. Weasley had wanted to make the wedding grand. She had even planned to hire a band and dress her sons formally. Fred had other ideas. He insisted, "Wear your favorite clothes. Wear whatever you like." So at the wedding, John saw everything from wizarding robes to beach shorts and pajamas. Harry looked around and frowned. "Where did Mrs. Weasley go?" "She's in the kitchen," Ron said. Fred tricked her into it. He meant to use a Petrificus Totalis on her so she'd stay put until the ceremony. "Why?" Harry didn't understand. "You don't know how terrifying she is," Ron exclaimed. "She wanted a symphony orchestra here." The thought made Ron shiver. Harry had to admit, the image was intimidating. The ceremony began. Mr. Weasley tugged at a slightly tight tie, while Mrs. Weasley wore a new purple robe and a magnificent jeweled hat, a gift from the twins. Their smiles were broad. Fred and George hadn't managed to escape their mother's grip. Large white roses were tucked into Fred and George's buttonholes. Bill looked a little downcast as he watched. Charlie patted his shoulder and told him to forget Fleur, though how anyone could forget a girl like Fleur seemed impossible. Golden balloons drifted upward. Angelina walked arm in arm with her father, Mr. Johnson, along a lavender aisle. As the guests sat, Fred took Angelina's hand and they smiled at each other. Ron grumbled beside John. "He's serious about this." The officiating wizard turned to Fred and asked the usual words. 2 sincere "I do's" later, he pronounced them husband and wife. Mrs. Weasley dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Hagrid, gentle despite his size, produced a tablecloth-sized handkerchief and sobbed openly. Ariana sat beside John, watching the wedding with her steady, unreadable eyes. John stroked her head and said, "You'll get married someday too." Ariana blinked. Luna, Everlit announced, "Those aren't roses. They're Weasley's new product, pop pop fireworks. Her father, Mr. Lovegood, peered at them with interest. Just as the wizard was about to introduce the band, Fred's mouth curled into that particular grin John recognized. He clearly didn't want a quiet wedding. Ladies and gentlemen, whoosh! Bang! Fred tore a white rose from his buttonhole, held it aloft, and shouted, "Let's party!" The rose burst into doves that flew up into the air. The golden balloons they'd let go of popped and became enormous candy bubbles that rained down. The white wedding tent shot upward, revealing Weasley's Wizard Wheezes fireworks that painted the sky in brilliant colors. The somber band ripped off their robes and with joyous flourishes switched to lively music. Dozens of cups fell from the sky and stacked themselves into a champagne tower as tall as Hagrid. Mrs. Weasley, stunned for a moment, was quickly swept into the dancing. Fred spun Angelina into a ridiculous, laughing dance. The tails of his tailcoat transformed into two magpies that zipped through the air, weaving among the music and the laughter. John smiled. Quiet was never the Weasleys' style. Revelry was their true tune. The wedding was also a display of the family's place in the wizarding world. Apart from the Malfoys and a few others, more than half of the 28 ancient pureblood families were in attendance, including some families that didn't even show up on official lists. The Weasleys' advantage among those families had long been their numbers rather than riches or power. For old families, prestige and continuity mattered more than wealth. Having many descendants was the surest way to keep a lineage alive. The Weasleys had 6 sons and a daughter, a far different situation from families with only one heir. With a name like Weasley, and Arthur Weasley, a man of simple pleasures and odd obsessions, their finances had never matched their pedigree. John had sometimes wondered whether Mr. Weasley had spent the family fortune on his research. Otherwise, how could a family with such a name be so hard-pressed? No wonder Percy had quarreled with his parents. John refrained from interfering on the twins and Percy's account, but he worried that continued decline would harm the family's future. When the festivities wound down, John said goodbye to Ariana and Luna. Ariana trotted along beside him, and Bathilda watched them with a pleased expression. "She's very good by your side," the old woman said, "better than by anyone else's." Ariana still spoke little, but she was much better than before. Bathilda approved of John's decision. That night, John didn't take the night bus. He held out his hand to Ariana and smiled. "I think your mother and father are getting anxious," he said. It was growing dark, and John didn't want to play cat and mouse with the agents who had been following him. Ariana grabbed his hand. John closed his eyes and apparated with her. They reappeared outside his house on Privet Drive. Ariana clutched his hand tightly, eyes flickering with the discomfort of her first apparition. John watched her closely. Seeing the strain, he thought, she's slowly learning to handle magic. Suppression alone wouldn't help. Like credence, keeping magic buried only makes it dangerous. If she learned to control it, it would never spiral out of control. They waited outside for a few breaths until Ariana had steadied herself. A little brown bear, a toy that always accompanied her, patted her encouragingly with its small paw. Fortunately, she only felt a little ill from the apparition. The Dumbledore family's bloodline was strong. Even Aberforth, who had the least talent, boasted considerable power. Ariana should recover. They walked toward the front door. At that moment, the disillusionment charm John had used finally wore off, and a nearby car pulled up. Watson climbed out carrying flowers and a box of candy and went to open the door. For a heartbeat, it looked as if Watson had appeared from nowhere. The agents who had been watching were stunned, their faces blank with confusion. Watson strode into the house, beaming. "I'm home," he announced, flourishing the large bouquet at Mrs. Wick. "I couldn't find flowers good enough for your beauty, so please accept these roses." Mrs. Wick, rarely at a loss for words, blushed and accepted the flowers. "And for lovely Ariana," Watson added, producing the box of gummy bears. Ariana, who had still been thinking about the wedding cake she'd eaten earlier, ran happily toward the sweets. Seeing the two girls, one big, one small, made the house glow with simple happiness. Watson glanced proudly at his son. John rolled his eyes at the display of smugness. "You child?" Ariana eagerly tore open a candy and pressed the first brown gummy bear toward John's lips. He didn't want to refuse, so he opened his mouth. She beamed as she fed him, then unwrapped the next candy and offered it to him again. Watson shamelessly sidled up and hinted to Ariana, "Dad wants something sweet too." Ariana solemnly picked up the candy box and handed it to Watson, as if performing an important duty. Chapter 632, Watson looked from John to the box of sweets in front of him, and then, hesitantly, asked, "Aren't you forgetting a step? Like unwrapping them and feeding them to me?" Ariana cocked her head, produced another box, and handed it to Watson. He took 2 stumbling steps back, clutching his chest. "Impossible," he murmured. "I refuse to believe my wife would stoop to this." He glanced at his wife. Mrs. Wick was unwrapping a bouquet of roses, selecting the 2 finest blooms and placing them in a vase. "John's room always felt a bit dull," she said. Mrs. Wick looked at her husband, who had dropped to his knees before her, and frowned, bewildered. "Damn it, how did I lose so completely?" Watson grumbled, unwilling to accept defeat. John was speechless. Since being left out at Christmas, his father had been doing everything he could to reassert his standing in the family. John didn't understand why Watson and his son were suddenly competing. What he didn't know was that Watson had been provoked. Watson had spent years building his empire, so his son would inherit a position of wealth and power by 18. As a result, even as a student, John already presided over a Downton Abbey-style household and commanded an intimidating retinue. People kept saying, "Your father wants you to be a proper second-generation rich. Why are you starting a business?" Confused by Watson's odd behavior, John nevertheless had more pressing matters after a few days at home. His first priority was to consolidate 2 factions, the Silverhand Alliance and the Ancient Alliance. The Silverhand Alliance required no introduction. Anyone invited to a banquet at Silverhand Manor belonged to it. The Ancient Alliance was different. Reorganized by Lucius, many of its members had yet to meet John and did not afford him the same reverence. If this rival power grew to match the Silverhand Alliance and John could not control it, it would have to be disbanded. That was John's plan, the policy of the Second King. Standing before a full-length mirror in a luxurious robe, John ran a hand over the emerald ring on his left finger and smiled faintly. He drew a finger across the glass. A golden vertical line split the mirror open. Voices and commotion rose from the other side of the portal. John stepped through. His soft footsteps stilled the noise. The room beyond was richly decorated. Crystal chandeliers cast a gentle white glow. Representatives of the 28 ancient families and the Silverhand Alliance filled the hall, 2 of Britain's most powerful interest groups, together responsible for more than half the Ministry of Magic's revenue. They had gathered at Silverhand Manor. Some of the ancient houses still carried their old arrogance. Mr. Weasley tugged at his collar and glanced uneasily at Percy beside him. Mr. Longbottom chatted amiably with his wife and old friends. "Isn't that Rita Skeeter?" Mr. Weasley murmured, nodding toward a woman in green. The Daily Prophet's editor-in-chief was a member of the Silverhand Alliance. Envoys from foreign nations were present too. He noticed a young man laughing with Pierce, the son of Charles Rowland, France's Minister of Magic. Everyone who mattered was represented. Under the sway of this interest group, no industry escaped their influence. "See, Father," Percy whispered, "survival of the fittest. We always have to make choices." Their low conversation died as the golden portal vanished and a figure appeared on the second floor. The second king of the magical world stood there, looking down over the assembled crowd. Voices rose in a confused chorus. "Mr. Silverhand, Mr. Wick." John frowned and snapped his fingers. The chandeliers dimmed. "The old ways must be swept away," he declared. "A new path lies before us." The passage behind him sealed shut. That single motion sent a ripple through the room. Silverhand Manor was warded against apparition, yet John had not dispelled those protections. Petty ambitions were checked, and everyone fell silent to listen. Chapter 648, Suppression, Power. An emerald-ringed hand rested on the bronze balustrade as John began to descend. 5 years ago, this place was in utter chaos, he said as he walked. Houses that should have been allies turned on one another for trivial gains. Disorder bred parasites who fed on every opening. Information gaps created injustice. Unfair transactions bred conflict. Conflict gave rise to slaughter. He reached the main floor and continued evenly, Slaughter drains magic. His gaze swept the room. Those with something to hide looked away. Profit is both a shackle and a bond. We gather for profit, unite for profit, and are bound by profit. I do not wish to see wizards slaughter one another, John went on. The rules I set serve wizards, and at a higher level, they preserve power. Fairness is full of contradictions. I cannot make every wizard fair, but I can guarantee this. What I see is fair. His eyes fixed on three figures before him. The crowd parted, leaving Axley, Avery, and Carol exposed and suddenly prominent. None of them had expected to be singled out. Panic showed on their faces. Axley, Avery, Carol, he called. He stepped toward them and asked without heat, I forgave you once for opposing me. Why did you not cherish that mercy? Axley forced a calm mask. Mr. Wick, we have never opposed you. John smiled, turned slightly, and addressed the hall. What Lord Voldemort gave you was fear. What I give is the grace to live. He paused, looking back at the three. You have betrayed that grace. Do you think I don't know who has been stirring trouble in the materials trade? What is your aim? Tarnish the Longbottom name? Bring down this alliance? It is surprising that some of you remain loyal to Voldemort even after his death. He snapped his fingers. A dueling platform rose from the floor between him and the three men. Calmly, he said, Step up or be expelled. Exposed and cornered, Axley, Carol, and Avery exchanged glances and climbed onto the platform. The hall erupted in boos. The crowd labeled them shameless. John raised a hand and silenced the din. There is no disgrace in knowing your limits, he said lightly. Power makes people lose themselves. I am pleased some know their worth. Laughter rippled through the room. Mockery and contempt sliced at the trio's dignity. Axley's face reddened with humiliation and hatred. The three took duel stances. John drew his wand slowly. I think you've forgotten proper duel etiquette, he said, then raised his wand higher. Now, bow. An invisible force pressed the three down. They struggled in vain. John compelled them to bow a full 90 degrees. The demonstration was terrifying. These men were not weak. Some were comparably powerful to aurors. Then John relaxed the spell, and the pressure lifted. They attacked at once. Petrificus totalis, expelliarmus, stupefy. Beams of light surged toward John. He raised his wand and blocked them effortlessly. The trio continued to coordinate volley after volley, but each spell collapsed before reaching him. John was making a deliberate show. His power was not that of a student. An alliance is an investment. The leaders needed to see he was secure. Admiration and murmurs swept the crowd. The newly integrated Ancient Alliance watched with mixed expressions. Enough. I think you should rest, John said casually. A green curse flashed. John tilted his head and avoided it with ease. Then he fixed Carol with a look. With a single raised hand, a white light struck through Carol's body. Carol's face contorted in disbelief as the light pierced him. 633, Chapter 633. He reached out, desperate for his teammates to pull him back, but his hand crumbled into sand and blew away. In less than 2 heartbeats, a living person had been reduced to dust. Horrified gasps filled the hall. Is that a shattering spell? Mr. Weasley whispered. Percy, however, looked only proud. The two who saw the danger tried to flee. John's eyes narrowed into cold, vertical slits. The two who had forced their way through the crowd went rigid, their faces drained of color, and then their bodies sagged to the floor. One was dead. The fates of the other two were uncertain. The Silver Hand Manor fell silent. John descended from the dueling platform with slow calm. I am not a bloodthirsty man, he said quietly. He snapped his fingers, and parchments flew out from the manor, scattering through the room. Everyone caught one and read. The papers detailed how the 3 families had been passing off inferior goods as superior across multiple trades. And worse, how they had taken secret pleasure in torturing muggles and conducting human experiments. I will report this to the Ministry of Magic, John said, his gaze sweeping those whose expressions had changed. What matters most is that we preserve the present. In the Ancient Alliance, Lucius applauded. Mr. Wick, allow me to applaud your nobility. His clap was a signal. Those who had hesitated began to applaud as well. The heads of the 28 ancient families joined in. They approved of the purge. They even settled on a new title for him, Mr. Wick, John Wick. The Ancient Alliance and the Silver Hand Alliance found a common name, a new order, the Second Dynasty. John stepped forward to fold this vast new dynasty into himself. He would not be stingy with the spoils. The three families' industries would be parceled out amid laughter at the banquet. Weasley looked uncomfortable, but he said nothing. As a Weasley who favored Muggles, he thought what those families had done deserved the executioner's mercy. "Percy," Pierce said with a smile as he approached, "come join us for a drink." In an arena of prestige and profit, refusal was impossible. Percy could not decline. Mr. Weasley was likewise ushered away by the head of the Prewett family to dine with Mr. Keir Macmillan. John stepped aside and clinked glasses with Lucius. "Thank you for your help, Lucius," John said. "Mr. Wick, you flatter me." Lucius's gaze flicked to Mr. Weasley. "He is Dumbledore's man. Is that acceptable?" John gave a small chuckle. "He'll adapt. We aren't the villains here. In many ways, we're the righteous ones." Righteousness, John knew, was a matter of power. The Second Dynasty would control the British magical world's food, clothing, housing, and travel. Even something as humble as a quill would come from the dynasty's interests. They commanded more than half the magical world's wealth and could make life better for everyone. That, John considered, was righteousness. With the suppression of rigid pure-blood doctrine removed, true fairness could take root. The endless mutual slaughter would fade, fewer lives would be lost, and that was a kind of light. Dumbledore, he thought, had relied on powerful magic and 2 triumphant battles, but had never truly handled the day-to-day governance of the magical world. John's work, on the other hand, moved toward practical reforms. Even the Little Wizard Fund alone was enough to pull families worldwide into his orbit. If Mr. Weasley found the new order awkward, he could remain allied in comfort, keep his position among the Second Dynasty, retire gracefully, and his family would still be on the winning side. John laughed softly. "We will only grow stronger, Lucius," he raised his glass, "to an even more glorious tomorrow." The entire hall lifted their goblets, eyes warm with fervor for the young man. His youth was his greatest asset and the dynasty's best guarantee. The Second Dynasty would last a century, and those who boarded its ship now would reap 100 years of glory. Lucius smiled as well. His cane marked his status, and with his other hand he raised his cup and called loudly, "To Mr. Wick." The second toast underlined Lucius's own standing. Under his leadership, the Malfoy family had entered its most prosperous era, and as his children grew, that prosperity would only deepen. Secret 49, Gresham, the choice. The situation in Germany was unpredictable. Yale Fan had publicly championed Dumbledore at the International Confederation of Wizards, despite strong objections. The Minister of Magic had been missing for too long, and a power struggle had followed. The contest weeded out the unfit. 4 names remained: Yale Fan, Lucivide, Gow-Erd, and Gresham. Yale Fan, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, was closest to the post and a staunch Dumbledore supporter. Lucivide had Edgar's backing and the support of the Ancient Alliance. Gow-Erd, the deputy minister, should have been next in line, but his foundation was weak. Gresham, head of the Auror office, had real strength and a record of service, making him the second strongest contender. The 4 were at a stalemate. Someone outside that quartet would have to tip the balance. Lucivide had no appetite to be minister himself. He was building strength and waiting for the right moment to act. At the entrance to Edgar's estate, a golden line appeared and a passage opened. John stepped out. He looked up at the castle and said with a touch of admiration, "Heinrich was truly born with a silver spoon in his mouth." In scale and opulence, perhaps only Malfoy's estate could compare. John adjusted his collar and knocked on the heavy oak door. After a moment, it opened to Edgar's butler. Edgar had long distrusted house elves, a prejudice tied to their roles in the house elf war. No creature willingly subjugates itself. Only domestication and the scars of past abuse could force a magical being, stronger than a wizard in many ways, into utter servitude. Whatever had happened in that war must have been terrible for Edgar, never to trust house elves again. "Mr. Wick," the butler said with respectful deference. He was an old acquaintance, the same man who had driven Heinrich back at Durmstrang. John nodded and entered. The castle's interior was dim, like a vampire's keep. Rain lashed the windows as the butler led John to Edgar's sitting room. Lucivide sat there, reading a letter. He looked up and smiled. "Mr. Wick, you should have been at Silver Hand Manor," John said with a chuckle. but it's wiser not to rattle the ministry's nerves tonight. You're right, Lucivid set the letter aside. Yale Fan is watching me closely. He's Dumbledore's supporter, John observed. Lucivid sank into the sofa, shaking his head. He always thinks I have ulterior motives where the German ministry is concerned. If you want, John said casually as he sat, I don't mind giving you a hand. Give up influence over Durmstrang? Lucivid shook his head. Not for that. I'm glad you see it that way. John rubbed the ring on his finger and asked, what about the other two? Yale Fan was already out of John's calculations simply for his loyalty to Dumbledore. Gowerde is unsuitable, Lucivid said. Too mediocre. His ambition exceeds his talent. That's his undoing. John nodded and considered. Then it looks like it can only be Gresham. For a time, many dark wizards stirred in German magical society, Lucivid said as the teapot poured red tea. Gresham did a lot of the practical work back then, but he made enemies among the old families. During Voldemort's rise, although the conflict did not officially spread abroad, the turmoil inspired sympathizers elsewhere. Durmstrang's more permissive attitude toward the dark arts had let arrogance grow among some dark practitioners. As head of the Auror office, Gresham had been a rare young progressive. He arrested many and clashed with powerful families. If Yale Fan had not obstructed him, Gresham might already be head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Young represents hope. Family? John smiled, a touch of arrogance in his voice. They'll clamp their mouths. Ludwig nodded. John's was the strongest family now. Once the other houses were pushed aside, only Yale Fan and Gowerde remained. Yale Fan, cozying up to Dumbledore, was sure to be targeted. Gowerde was ambitious but talentless, loud and foolish, the sort who loved playing at power. Under Minister Schmidt, he had been little more than a mascot, a pawn to steady certain German houses. With Schmidt gone, he'd started reaching. The forces behind him had started to hope. With John's intervention, those hopes were doomed. I want to meet Gresham, John said. He wouldn't help for nothing. He only offered aid that could be used by him. Ludwig understood at once and replied, he's already on his way. Ludwig had told Gresham that he no longer wished to compete. Hearing his rival withdrew, Gresham would come to confirm, and Ludwig expected be won over. Everyone who knew Edgar knew what Edgar represented. By the time John finished his first cup of black tea, a knock came at the castle of Edgar. John watched the lone butler who answered the door and raised an eyebrow. This place is huge. Have you never thought of hiring more servants? That would be too noisy, Ludwig said without changing his expression. Father and son, it seemed, were cut from the same cloth. A second cup of tea was poured before the director of the German Ministry of Magic's Auror office arrived. Gresham's voice carried down the corridor before he appeared, sharp with displeasure. You didn't tell me there would be another guest, he snapped to the butler. The apology was perfunctory. Gresham found the man in front of him oddly familiar. He searched his memory for the face. Ludwig rose and walked out, closing the door behind him. Left alone with a tense silence, Gresham watched the newcomer carefully. John studied the Auror. He was not the withered figure of old Barty. He looked to be in his 30s, promising for a man in that position. Gray suit, angular face, pointed chin and high forehead, gray-blue eyes, a day or two of stubble that made him look more mature, cautious, wary. John gauged him quickly. Sit, John said matter-of-factly. Don't worry, I'm not interested in your life. I don't recall knowing you. Gresham sat opposite, leaning forward, hostile. He moved like a wolf. John's fingers toyed with his ring as he smiled. I know you, Emmond Gresham, director of the Auror office. Gresham's face didn't relax. John leaned forward, propping his cheek on his hand and chuckling. Let's be blunt. Gresham, do you want to be Minister of Magic? Gresham's expression hardened. Who exactly are you? John paused, then introduced himself in the guise the man would recognize most readily. He set his hand down and smiled. You can call me Second King. Of course, he added with another faint smile, Lord Wick works too. Recognition clicked in Gresham's eyes. He'd seen that face in newspapers. The black and white photos hadn't done the youth justice. Up close, the face was startlingly young. Ludwig sent you to deal with me? Gresham asked. No, John shook his head slowly. I'm here to help you deal with him. Gresham's confusion was obvious. John got to the point. Ludwig will not compete with you. I want to back a Minister of Magic. Gresham's laugh was short and cold. You're speaking wildly. This is strength, John said coolly. If you agree, Ludwig will help you handle the rest. The offer was enormous. After a moment of internal struggle, Gresham asked, What do I have to give? Everything you have, John said without hesitation. Once you are Minister of Magic, you must cooperate with me. Gresham's laugh turned bitter. You think I'll be your puppet? You don't know me. John laughed too, at Gresham's misunderstanding. I'm not enslaving you. I'm proposing cooperation. He sat back as the gray day pressed its shadows against the windows, his figure seeming to blend into the gloom. Only when I need you will I call. You will be Minister of Magic. That will not change. You should have understood from the start that I don't want a puppet, John continued. If he'd wanted a puppet, he'd pick someone like Goyle, inept and ambitious, easy to manipulate. Gresham knew that. He was not a fool. That made John's offer puzzling. It's simple, John said, reading the doubt on Gresham's face. I prefer to work with clever people rather than stubborn ones who can't adapt. At the mention of Yale Fan, the pieces fell into place for Gresham. First King and Second King, no secret. Yale Fan was a Dumbledore loyalist. If Yale Fan rose, John would be displeased. Seeing John's motive, a new confidence lit Gresham's eyes. You want me to defeat Yale Fan with your help? He asked. Why wouldn't I break the agreement after I'm minister? You won't, John replied simply, because it would be easier for me to destroy you. A coldness rushed up from Gresham's feet, straight to his crown. The room blurred. In the dark beyond the edges of vision, immeasurable forms writhed, tentacles pulling people into an abyss. They constricted him, robbed him of breath, choked sound. He struggled like a mantis before a chariot and felt it was hopeless. In that darkness, vertical pupils watched him without emotion as he flailed toward being swallowed. You can choose now, John said, and then everything snapped back. The abyss vanished, the tentacles and the choking pressure gone as if a veil had been lifted. Gresham gulped air, his lungs burning, unsure what had just happened. He'd come closer to death than he could say. The message, however, was clear. This man was not to be trifled with. It was simpler, far simpler, for John to annihilate a minister than to build one. You had a hand in supporting Minister Crouch, didn't you? Gresham said slowly, trying to steady his voice. I respected him. You weren't wrong to, John said. He was different. He was my friend. Gresham looked at him. And me? John smiled faintly. You'll need enough power to stand before me. I'll get there, Gresham said, voice low, after I become Minister of Magic. I look forward to that day, John said. He rose, swept his hand through the air, and a golden passage opened. Under Gresham's stunned gaze, John stepped into it and disappeared. The door opened, and Ludwig walked in as if nothing had happened. You can leave now, he said. Gresham remained seated, petulant. You told me to come for one sentence, and now suddenly I'm the man Lord Wick supports. You owe me an explanation. You already called him Lord Wick, Ludwig said coolly. Do I need to explain further? The remark came as a small, disquieting confirmation. Gresham fell silent. Whoever had just been in that room demanded more than words. We're classmates, after all. Don't you think sending me into a place like that would get me killed? Gresham grumbled. I am not your classmate, Ludwig replied coolly. I'm 2 years ahead of you. Gresham ground his teeth. So you're just afraid the Second King will kill me? You're not worth it, Ludwig said bluntly. In his eyes, you're not even a threat. Gresham was momentarily speechless. After a long pause, he looked at Ludwig with a seriousness that cut through the rain and asked, Tell me the truth. Did I make the right choice? Ludwig's answer was simple. He has never failed. That settled it for Gresham. Power was everything. He won't stifle the growth of his people. When you're strong enough, you'll be his equal. Ludwig's words eased some of Gresham's reluctance. He stood to leave. He couldn't apparate like John and couldn't open portals at will, so he had no choice but to go by foot. As he reached the door, on a whim he asked, So, are you his friend or his subordinate? Ludwig's eyes flickered with a small smile. I'm the father of his friend. Which do you think I am? Gresham inhaled sharply. All his admiration for that student principal had been for nothing. Ludwig was just riding his son's coattails. He stormed out of the castle, splashing through puddles in the rain. From the battlements, Ludwig watched him go, murmuring, Sweep away the obstacles, control Germany, Where do you intend to stop? As Heinrich's father, he hoped John's ambitions would be boundless. The light falling on Edgar was growing ever brighter. The situation in Germany shifted quickly. With Ludwig's withdrawal from the contest, his supporters swung behind Gresham. That endorsement carried Durmstrang and the Ancient Alliance with it. Families who had opposed Gresham found themselves warned by the Ancient Alliance and quickly silenced. Leaders who might have resisted were cowed. The Silverhand Alliance's threats left them unwilling to act. "This is the Second Dynasty's reach," one head of a German pureblood family muttered. "The Ancient Alliance is blocking us. The Silverhand has warned us. It's not just you in trouble, it's all of us." In days, the German pureblood families fell quiet. They might have resisted as one, but they were not united, and the pressure singled them out. Gau Erde urged his backers to move, but with Ludwig's shift, Gau Erde was effectively pushed out of the race. That left only Yale Fan and Gresham. One candidate stood for the stubborn old order, the other for the rising new era. A follower of the first king versus a subordinate of the second. The first king's influence had always been diffuse. His followers didn't band together. The Second Dynasty surged forward, unstoppable, another clear contrast between John and Dumbledore. John sat at home laughing over the newspaper Basil had brought him. The contest between the remaining candidates had quietly been decided. Ludwig had not been Karkaroff. The professor's reputation had never faltered during his tenure as headmaster. When Fudge had been minister, a few kind words from Dumbledore had helped secure his election. That was the kind of influence the three great European schools still held. Satisfied, John set the paper down and stroked Basil carefully. "You've been putting on weight," he mused. Basil, chewing on dried fish, paused and glared at Kiki, who was nibbling biscuits. Kiki blinked innocently. Basil had simply come over and slapped the owl twice. 2 slaps on an owl was psychological warfare in a dragon's mind. Both creatures were too proud to accept sudden assaults. Basil regarded the jolt as post-meal exercise. Riddle sat on his perch, squinting and refusing to take sides. A brown bear cub clambered up a nearby rail, paws twitching to touch the owl's feathers, and John caught Ariana hiding on the stairs, cheering the cub on in secret. Pierce moved through the Ministry of Magic with carefully practiced hauteur and stopped at the elevator. "Deputy Minister Thickness," he announced, putting on a faux genial smile. "Good morning, Lena," someone replied. Pierce allowed himself to enter the empty elevator, politely stopping a passing employee and saying, "Sorry, I need to go up to the minister's office," until she stepped back. During the busy commute hour, he occupied the car alone, savoring the small triumph. When the elevator reached the floor of the minister's office, he walked in with a light, confident step and knocked. "Come in," came old Barty's voice. Barty Crouch Sr. folded his paper down and peered over it. "Pierce," he said, spotting the newspaper tucked under Pierce's arm. "I was just about to read this." "It's about the Second Dynasty," Pierce said with a smile, offering the paper. Old Barty took it and scanned the headlines. "Yale Fan lost the election," he said, the first piece of good news on the page. Old Barty had long been a loyalist to the Second King. Yale Fan had openly invoked Dumbledore more than once at the International Confederation, a sure sign of whose faction he belonged to. Old Barty did not trust Dumbledore. He admired the man's power, but he hated Dumbledore's habit of working in secret, forming small teams, and acting outside the ministry. During the Grindelwald affair, the ministry had been cut out. During Voldemort's rise, the pattern repeated. Dumbledore took credit, while the ministry provided manpower and resources and bore the losses. He distrusted the man who would answer to no one and operate from an ivory tower. So long as Dumbledore remained untouchably revered, old Barty could tolerate him as a public icon, but he would never accept him as the true political authority. Old Barty flipped the paper again. The second item explained the first. The Silverhand Alliance's sanctions and the Ancient Alliance's warnings had created economic turmoil in German magical society. That turmoil hit Yale Fan hard and forced his withdrawal from the ministerial race. Gresham's confirmation as German Minister of Magic followed. As soon as he took office, he moved to resolve the economic chaos. Then, leveraging that turmoil, he declared war on the Saints. Chapter 636. Those who reported would be rewarded. He took a hard line. engaging in an unrelenting struggle against Grindelwald's followers. The German Minister of Magic's position was being challenged, but the Second Dynasty did not slow down. They bought into industries across multiple countries, planting their flags in almost every nation. The Silver Hand Alliance supplied the capital, and the Ancient Alliance cleared the way. With those two giants working together, almost no one could resist. In less than a week, the Ancient Alliance's funds had been reduced by more than half, and yet none of the 28 ancient families objected. Their massive purchases promised even more terrifying profits in the future. Once this year passed, the returns would be enough to make them fabulously wealthy. As their leader had said, profit is both a shackle and a bond. Shared wealth made the Ancient Alliance more united than ever. The network they were building expanded exponentially. The Second Dynasty's tsunami swept across the magical world. The bigger the storm, the greater the opportunities. Minister Crouch saw John's intention clearly. "Mr. Wick has won us more supporters," he observed. Pierce grinned. "The International Confederation of Wizards is already a sure thing." Crouch was less jubilant. "Taking such a big step makes control difficult," he mused. John had essentially sent a signal to all of Europe at once. That would provoke stubborn or radical wizards into fierce resistance. Spreading too far, too fast could weaken the Second Dynasty's hold. That was Crouch's worry. John and the Second Dynasty were powerful, but the power of Europe was vast and complex. Pierce waved the concern away. "Minister Crouch, you haven't seen Mr. Wick's methods." John had written the rules of the game, and everyone had to follow them. The Second Dynasty's machine caused little stir among ordinary folk, but triggered an earthquake among the families. Nearly every house felt a tiger at the gate. Mr. Longbottom handled acquisitions and sales of magical materials in various markets. Mr. Greengrass managed the import and export of magical goods. Goyle and Crabbe muscled into the stationery market. Parkinson moved into potions. Edgar cornered antiques. Malfoy took over sports equipment and aggressively acquired 3 professional Quidditch clubs. Diggory sold new flavored snacks abroad. The Weasley twins' joke items sold across nations. Even the Silver Hand Alliance pushed into the smallest of markets. Every feather quill, it seemed, bore their mark. The Second Dynasty swept across Europe like a contagion. Their primary tactic was acquisition. For those who resisted, the ancient families' reign dominance made the consequences clear. The ministries of magic were helpless. These newcomers were connected to almost every major European house. The Delacour family in France turned their wine business into a phenomenon. Among certain circles, any family without a bottle of Silver Hand wine was considered second-rate. High-end tableware and fresh ingredients followed. If a nut changed hands in Paris, it seemed destined for Silver Hand coffers. John paused only when too many countries started to panic. At Silver Hand Manor, playing with a reverse scale charm between his fingers, he chuckled. "Next, it's time to get it running." The Second Dynasty began to operate. Where they had taken root, they sprouted fast. Their operation resembled interlocking, densely packed gears driving a massive machine. Newspapers screamed about their audacity. Ministries welcomed negotiators who demanded convenience in exchange for access, acceptable product prices for the populace, in return for Silver Hand's presence. This wasn't self-sacrifice. When the machine could produce and sell on its own, costs would fall drastically. If John wanted to wage a price war, he could slash prices to half, and they'd still profit. Ministry officials were not blind to the danger. They all understood what an enormous interest group could do. Yet Silver Hand's methods were legitimate, and there was little they could do but watch the largest capital force in the European magical world move in. Fortunately, Silver Hand mostly played by national rules. Many officials even benefited personally. Refusal was impossible. Lucius handled negotiations with countries. Mr. Greengrass took charge of transport. Greengrass regarded 30 soul lamps before him, 30 fully concealed, large ships that let him appear anywhere. Mr. Longbottom, once honest to a fault, was suddenly seen as a wealthy tycoon. Once the Second Dynasty began moving in earnest, it was unstoppable. Longbottom was rushing. Mr. Weasley was rushing too. Arthur Weasley had never imagined he'd be tangled in such massive conflicts of interest. The twins were natural entrepreneurs and worked all day. Even Angelina, now Fred's new wife, had been assigned by Fred to supervise product production. Arthur, as head of the second ancient family, had become a public official who was suddenly treated with unusual respect. Those who once called him Arthur now addressed him as Director Weasley. One evening, he came home exhausted. Only 4 people were in the house: Arthur and Molly, Ron and Ginny. Ron was making plans to open his own shop. Ginny had failed several times trying to get him back into Quidditch training. Molly opened the door and, expecting the twins, looked disappointed. "I thought it was Fred and George," she said. "They aren't coming today. Oh, Molly, this is for you." Arthur set a bag on the table. Molly stepped forward and opened it with puzzled eyes. The gold inside almost blinded her. She shrieked as the bag tipped. Golden galleons spilled across the table and clinked on the floor. There was a gift box, too, jewel earrings nestled within. "What is this?" she stammered. "Money and presents," Arthur said. He pointed outside. "Ginny's new broom is out there." "No, Arthur. I mean, what did you do? You didn't rob Gringotts, did you?" Molly asked, worried. "Gringotts?" Arthur laughed helplessly. "Even if I wanted to, I wouldn't have the means. This is the Ancient Alliance's dividend. They had invested in the Ancient Foundation. This was the return." Old Goyle had placed the money before him, and Arthur reacted as his wife did. Ron and Ginny came down at the noise and froze at the galleons. "Are we dreaming?" Ron said blankly. Ginny pinched him hard to make sure they weren't. There were at least 5,000 galleons, an immediate quarter return on the money originally invested, not counting the gifts. Ginny squealed and rushed outside to claim the Nimbus 2001 broom. Ron stared green-eyed. "Don't you still want to open that shop? Take some of this," Arthur said, still in disbelief himself. The Weasleys had always been frugal, but now their world had shifted. The words felt natural and right. The Second Dynasty's industries bore one unmistakable sign. Every business accepted young wizard card discounts, half price. Quills, ink, parchment, hotels, materials, potions, even the night bus riders paid half. Anything related to learning was half price. Wolfsbane and ruby potions were half price too. Did the Second Dynasty lose money? No. The young wizard card came with conditions. If a card was used for profit, Silverhand reserved the right to cancel it. Half-price young wizard purchases could not be paid in galleons directly. Galleons had to be converted, recharged, onto the card. In other words, they exchanged galleons for points stored on the card. Young wizards wouldn't spend all their points at once, but would use them in batches. By the time someone bought one half-price item, the cycle of recharging and spending already brought in enough galleons to finance the production of hundreds of items. The machine fed itself. Chapter 637. How could John make the card's data unchangeable? Don't forget who the world's greatest alchemist was. He had a sliced magic crystal embedded in each little wizard card, creating a fixed storage structure that could not be altered except by a handful of designated institutions. That was the Second Dynasty's secret: internalized, tamper-proof control. Merchants who refused to join couldn't possibly match the prices offered through that system. Their only fate was to be crushed. Submit or be conquered, there was no middle way. By creating the Little Wizard Fund, John had seized the moral high ground. No Ministry of Magic could afford to refuse. To do so would make them an enemy of every wizarding family. At that moment, the Second Dynasty seemed unstoppable. John dreamed even bigger. If he could push the Little Wizard card format far enough, it might replace galleons entirely. Gringotts' role would shrink, and the Second Dynasty would become the largest interest group in the magical world, like Muggle banks. At breakfast, watching Kiki nibble at a mouthful of salad, John idly glanced at the newspaper and said, "The Second Dynasty, what do you make of this?" Watson took a sip of milk. He read magical newspapers out of habit, but didn't know much about the wizarding world. Still, the headline, "The Second Dynasty, a massive machine crushing everything," sounded ominous. "Is there magic outside Britain?" he asked. John thought a moment. "All over the world, but it depends on where it's hidden." "So there are that many wizards?" Watson sounded surprised. He'd always thought wizards must be extremely rare. "Haven't they ever thought of ruling the world?" "They're less than 1 in 10,000 compared to ordinary people," John said. "And apart from magic, they don't have many advantages." "Dad, you fought wizards, and you had just a pistol. Weren't you as good as? Watson caught himself, remembering how he'd almost killed a wizard. John had indeed held his own in a fight. Muggles' fear of wizards came largely from myth and mystery. Once their methods were understood, the fear faded. Oh, Watson said, relaxing. I thought the Second Dynasty might be trying to conquer the world. Watson then tried to tease Kiki with a strip of bacon. Kiki glared at the bacon, indignant, and took a huff at her salad instead. John smiled and didn't mention that the Second Dynasty was, in part, his son's business. What puzzled him more was why Ariana fed Kiki salad. Ariana explained earnestly, salad helps with weight loss. The meat will taste better later. Kiki froze. She bolted to fly away, but Ariana caught her paw and held on. John stared. Where did you get an idea like that? Ariana let Kiki go, raced into the kitchen, and came back with a worn recipe book titled Complete Guide to Cooking the Scottish Round-Faced Fat Chicken. John stared at the title, speechless. Where did you get this? At the Constellation Society. Ariana blinked innocently. Isn't it right? It was right. The name fitted. But John's look at Kiki was one of sympathy. He hadn't expected Ariana to treat the poor creature as emergency rations. He had to have a talk. Owls and other companions may be food in some places, but there were better choices. And besides, Kiki wasn't an owl. She was a purebred Peruvian viper dragon. After a lot of persuasion, Ariana relented. Kiki got the bacon, taken from Watson's plate. Watson had been teasing the bird and lost his breakfast. He learned not to be too arrogant. After breakfast, John didn't linger with Watson and Kiki's fragile truce. There were Second Dynasty matters to attend. Outwardly relaxed, he was busier than ever. He had to manage the big picture, use his reputation to liaise with foreign powers, and shore up support for Barty Crouch. Advancing now would also raise Old Barty's profile. The two efforts were entwined. If Old Barty prospered, the Second Dynasty would find it easier to act, mutual benefit. Election day is September 1st, John murmured one afternoon, stroking his chin. That's a good date. It would draw candidates and supporters from everywhere. The leading contenders were Ing and Old Barty. Ing's heroic image was being carefully cultivated, portrayed as someone who would help Poland, and the campaign made failing to help Poland seem like a sin. We've got time to build momentum, John said. Once the Second Dynasty was activated, it would be hard to stop. The German and French ministers of magic had already declared for Old Barty. Those countries housed 3 of Europe's largest magical schools and together held sway over most European wizards. In a different time, Old Barty might have taken power without an election, as Dumbledore once could have, but Ing had emerged to contest him. John wrote a letter and sent it to Beau Batten. If Madame Maxime could be brought in, Old Barty would be nearly unbeatable. The 3 great schools represented the alma maters of European wizards for generations. He opened the void and stepped through. Now, with Joe Wu's ability, he used the fireplaces less and void travel more. At Silverhand Manor, he found Lucius waiting. Lucius's clothes had grown more ornate. He sat with the deference still intact. In the quiet of the manor, John asked about Lucius's visit. Lucius reported on the ancient foundation. Several families have reinvested recently, Lucius said. I'd like to donate half of our new funds to the Little Wizard Fund. Spending money like water was startling, but the returns tempted everyone. They wanted to take another step so the Second Dynasty could keep advancing. John smiled and asked, "How are the 3 Quidditch clubs you just acquired?" Lucius was momentarily surprised, then pleased. "Very good. They've declined somewhat over the years, but the foundations are still strong." As the richest of the 28 ancient families, Lucius' choice looked odd to some. Quidditch clubs weren't the most profitable venture. Materials and potions made the big money. Only John knew what Lucius was doing, preparing for a professional league, a plan John had proposed. If Old Barty became president of the International Confederation of Wizards, the league could spread across Europe. Quidditch would boom. Buying the clubs now would mean owning the founding teams when the league launched, goose egg investments that would lay golden eggs later. John shook his head. Sometimes too much control is dangerous. A league needs competition to be exciting, Lucius said slowly. If the outcome is already decided, why bother watching? He understood at once. I'll hold back. 3 clubs no more, Lucius agreed. If he concentrated ownership, Lucius could control the whole league. something John didn't want. The excitement of honest competition would attract spectators and keep the league viable. The second dynasty should advance, but the greedy needed to be restrained. Too much conspicuous accumulation would invite criticism. When John, the second king, expressed such limits, people listened. Old Barty's prestige, meanwhile, continued to rise. Articles about the Little Wizard Fund circulated and support grew. The connection between John and Old Barty was an open secret. Wizards from many countries envied the Little Wizard card. It was the kind of innovation that had to be handled regionally, with careful diplomacy and the right champions. Chapter 6 and 38. This also meant that if a country didn't have Silverhand Johnny, its students would be unable to apply for Little Wizard cards. It wasn't obvious yet, but when the new term began, it was easy to imagine how much trouble those with Little Wizard cards could cause for those without them. Ministry of Magic. Pierce sat beaming, watching Old Barty's approval ratings climb. He folded the newspaper just as Percy walked by and called after him. "Director Percy, care to join me for a meal?" Percy paused and then smiled. "My pleasure, Undersecretary Thickness." "Not so formal, Percy," Pierce said, leaning in. "Just call me Pierce." They were on the same side, and Pierce knew Percy's rise was nearly certain. Less than a year away from becoming Director of International Magical Cooperation, and in the following years moved to the Department of Magical Law Enforcement at the same rank, effectively a clear path toward Minister of Magic. Pierce himself lacked the backing of a powerful family and wasn't really suited to be minister, so Percy was the one set up for the role. Percy did not refuse. It was the expected courtesy of office. Over lunch, Pierce asked whether the Second Dynasty might make another move. Percy, as the third scion of the Second Ancient Clan, didn't answer directly. "I think John will have his own plans, and Minister Crouch will keep in touch with him," he said. Pierce nodded. As a man who had risen by smooth connections, he understood there were things he didn't need to pry into. He just needed to play his part well. He recommended the fish soup with an enthusiastic smile, and Percy responded in kind, becoming more and more at ease in these rituals. France. Fleur stepped into the Silverhand Johnny shop. Jin spread his hands exaggeratedly. "Beautiful Miss Delacour, an honor to have you." Fleur covered a laugh. "I thought it was time I came to see you all." Jin welcomed her effusively. Fleur asked after Heinrich. "He's more practical-minded," Jin said helplessly. "You've come at a perfect time. There's about to be quite a show." "A show?" Fleur glanced around. Everything looked normal in the shop. Then a roar exploded outside. Green and red light flared together, and Jin smiled. "They're here." Outside, Heinrich had his wand up. A flame shifted into a steed that stamped down on the witch attempting the killing curse. Jin and Fleur hurried out to see a group of attackers fighting the shop's security. "Expecto Patronum," someone called. A white horse Patronus appeared on the battlefield, taking a crucio aimed at Heinrich and kicking its caster away. Heinrich was calm. He kept his wand moving, forming walls of flame to block escape. Cornered, the attackers tried to apparate, but the steed knocked one down. Fleur joined in, flicking her wand to bind the fallen attackers like packages. The white horse shielded Heinrich. Jin raised his left hand, and a red light pulsed from his ring, disarming a would-be sneak attacker. Fleur stunned the assailant. In the aftermath, all the attackers were captured. Heinrich stepped to one prisoner, forced open their collar with a spell, and exposed a Deathly Hallows-like mark burned into their neck. He ripped the mark free and tossed it aside. Jin caught it and raised an eyebrow. "Them again," he said. "Someone's been asking about Silverhand Johnny. Looks like they were preparing to act." "They're the Saints," Heinrich said coldly. "Grindelwald's followers. Their appearance in France is odd." "You know those people better than anyone," Jin teased. "After all, you're the king's deputy." Heinrich shoved Jin away, annoyed. "We should tell John," Fleur said. "This timing is bad." "That's why we left them alive." Jin draped an arm over Heinrich's shoulder. "We need Veritaserum or Legilimens." Fleur chuckled at their confidence. "Coincidentally, our king satisfies both conditions." Heinrich smiled too. Yes, their king could manage it. As they prepared to send the prisoners to Britain, John was finishing his 8th magic blood. He uncorked a vial of blood that looked sacred and poured it into the magic blood mixture. The two liquids churned in the test tube, turning over and over. John stared at the swirling red. After days of experiment, he was certain this combination wouldn't be rejected. The magic blood neutralized the dangerous side effects. As the crimson eddies slowed, the silhouette of an animal formed within the liquid. The recondensed red coalesced into a horse with a single horn, a unicorn. Gradually, the liquid shifted from blood red to a distinct milky white, holy and luminous. John held the magic blood and frowned. If unicorn blood is taken by force, it brings a powerful curse. This blood was traded for with Weiwei, he reminded himself. It should be fine. John had seen what drinking unicorn blood did in his first year, and it hadn't been easy to face. But he had committed to this. He could not waste it. He opened the vial. The milky white seemed to want to leap free. John lifted it and drank in one gulp. Light rushed down his throat and spread through his body. The magic blood's pulse began. John knew the sensation. His body was suffused with magic. The roses on the table burst into rapid bloom, and the lawn outside alternately grew and wilted as the magic surged. He reached out and squeezed his palm. For a heartbeat, his hand felt as if it shattered into surging darkness, and the next instant, that darkness transmuted into piercing light. Every inch of his skin shimmered with sanctity. His hair flared into a splendid aurora that floated as if weightless. John's feet lifted off the floor. He floated, radiating light like a small sun. A normal person looking at him would be blinded. He had experienced magical outbursts before, but never anything like this. Is this the power of the holy unicorn? He wondered. Unicorns had always been the darlings of the magical world, beautiful, psychic, and uniquely powerful among magical creatures. Even dementors and boggarts paled beside them. Creatures near unicorns tended to protect them. They were the most cherished beings in many ways. As the light slowly dimmed, John felt himself become weightless and serene, the white light settling beneath his skin. A chiming sound announced the end of the process. Ding! Magic blood complete. System gains. Unicorn trait blessings acquired. Light, holiness, divine blood, ethereal. Light enhances light attributes, grants a light elemental state. Holiness increases magical affinity and magic damage. Holy domain repels incoming curses. Divine blood grants toxin immunity and improves healing. Ethereal enhances psychic abilities. John exhaled a white breath. He raised his left hand and watched it transform. Like transparent glass lit by an inner dawn, its veins shone like optical fibers. He lifted his right hand and a dark, ominous black aura leaked from it. One side of him radiated holiness, the other rolled with darkness. Day and night coexisted inside John in a surprising harmony. He clenched his left fist. Light poured along his arm, cloaking his body. His hair lengthened and floated as if gravity had no hold on it. He himself rose higher, drifting. As an elemental state, he seemed freed from gravity's restraints. A magical state, he murmured. He didn't recall unicorns having such a mode, or perhaps this was a hidden aspect of unicorn power, one even they hadn't been aware of. The abilities the unicorn blood granted were immediately practical. John snapped his fingers. A warm, white barrier bloomed around him. He reached out and touched it, feeling its strange, comforting warmth. Chapter 6 and 39. This was the sacred domain. It amplified John's magic and repelled curses. White magic, similar to the Patronus charm, worked even better here. Divine blood had freed him from the possibility of being poisoned. His blood would expel toxins. He slashed his palm and watched the red mix with filaments of gold, feeling less human than before. In this form, I'm less a second king and more like a king of white magic, he murmured with a rueful smile. He conjured a mirror. His reflection looked transcendent. Draped in a white robe, he could have passed for a white-robed wizard. He drew 2 slow, steady breaths to steady the strangeness. When he looked again, his features had returned to normal, though his skin had taken on a delicacy that he guessed came from the unicorn's influence. He noticed the 4th blessing, enhanced mental ability. John had always been strong with mind magic. He wanted to know how far it could go. He reached out with his mental sense. Instantly, a storm of voices surged into his head, distinct and unbearably close. He staggered and forced his power back. The voices vanished, leaving him with a grim expression. That range just now, could it have been all of Surrey? No, bigger than that, he realized. He steadied himself and tried again. Gradually, his mental reach expanded. Voices floated through. Watson Wick wore the wrong tie today? Some secret signal? There's a contest at school next week. I'm going to win this time. TD hasn't been eating much cat food today. Should I change the flavor? As his range widened, he picked up more mundane things. Neighbors on Privet Drive arguing about deliveries, someone haggling over coffee beans, another wondering where to get fries. A panicked whisper, "Close call. Thankfully, I hid in the closet." "Wait, why is there someone else in my closet? Where are you touching?" And a satisfied chuckle, "Delivered right to my door." John kept expanding until he could feel thoughts across London. He withdrew the stream. The noise was overwhelming. If he stretched it any further, he might lose himself in it. Unless he learned to filter out the static and isolate the thoughts he wanted, large-scale use was dangerous. Still, a curious experiment nagged at him. He left the basement and stood by the window, fixing his gaze on number 5, Privet Drive. 2 special agents were posted outside, watching Watson. John nudged his mental ability toward them and listened. "Slap! Ow! What did you do?" The older agent stared at his palm, then at his subordinate, who looked wounded and bewildered. "I don't know. Suddenly I just really wanted to hit you," he said. The young agent was stunned and offended. He wondered if he'd been insulted, but had no proof. The old agent, looking equally baffled, backhanded the young man again. After the second slap, he scratched his head and repeated, "I don't know why. I just suddenly wanted to hit him." The young man felt both humiliated and strangely proud. From his army days, he'd learned to obey. Maybe this was a tough love test from a seasoned superior, he told himself. The old agent's method of training must be unconventional, but deliberate. He persuaded himself it was for the best, convincing himself of a meaning that wasn't there. John watched the mental justification wash over the young man and couldn't help smirking. To a degree, he could influence others' thoughts with his mind magic. This power, subtler and more insidious than Imperio, was terrifying because it was so hard to detect or defend against. "It's an unexpected gain," he said softly. The unicorn had given him too many surprises. Chapter 655, Azkaban Prisoner, Father and Son, Silverhand Manor. A special guest had arrived. John toyed with his wand, eyes fixed on the figure standing before him. The man said nothing, but his clenched fists betrayed the turmoil inside him. "You want to see your father?" John asked casually. A faint smile touched John's lips. "Is this a request or an exchange?" "Theodore." The man answered the name as if it were an anchor. John's wand stilled. Its worn notches spoke of hard use. Theodore heard the question and wavered. He closed his eyes, feeling the pain of the choice. His fingernails bit into his palms until they bled. The knot line was withering. Everyone could see it. The Ancient Alliance had struck the knot name from its list. A once proud family among the Sacred 28 had failed to adapt to the new king and had become expendable. Theodore felt his grandfather's strength slipping away. Of all the ancient purebloods, only a handful remained. The weight of legacy and Slytherin's old glory pressed on him. He sank to his knees and bowed his head. "I request, great king," he said, "please let me see my father one last time. It will be the last time." He knew he had to cut that tie. John's wand rose a fraction. "In return, you'll retrieve something from me," he said. "I told you, you will lose everything." "I do not regret it," Theodore replied in a low voice. John lowered his wand and nodded. "Go to Nocturne Alley tomorrow. Someone will meet you there." He rose and regarded the former Slytherin. Theodore's loyalty had been proven by action, but he had not been ironclad. Torn between duty and family, he had finally chosen. The wand had been in John's hand long enough for him to notice a ring hidden in Rippy's wand. That ring had ended up in old Barty's pocket. In the coming election, that ring would be used as a weapon to slay the hero. "You may go," John said casually. "Thank you, great king." Theodore stood and began to leave, but paused when John spoke again. "You're not a bad man, Theodore," John said without looking up. "Nor are you entirely good. This path will make your life painful. Don't let Pansy down. She's been waiting for you." Pansy Parkinson had never stopped searching for news of Theodore. When he was sent to Poland as a student and never returned, she begged her father to use the Ancient Alliance's resources to look for him. She may have been foolish and not the cleverest, but her devotion was genuine. John set his wand on the desk. The old knot is gone. The new knot will be your choice. If Theodore remained, the knot name might not die. He understood what John meant. After leaving the study, Theodore muttered, "It's time to decide, Father." He wanted to see his father one last time and tell him his choice. The next day, Theodore went to Nocturne Alley. A ministry employee waited and smiled. "Mr. Knott, please follow me." They boarded a thestral carriage, and the employee flicked the reins. The world dropped away as the carriage flew. Theodore said nothing. When they landed, the man led him into the new Azkaban. "Please stay close to me," the ministry employee, the warden of this Azkaban, said. If Theodore strayed more than 2 meters, he would be targeted and locked onto for attack. The new Azkaban was more magical than the old. Its wards and controls were subtle and severe. The prisoners inside, Death Eaters and Dark Wizards, lifted their hollow eyes to Theodore as he came in. Several members of the Sacred 28 were here as well, though all marked by defeat and decline. Chapter 640. Among the group, there were 2 anomalies. Norman, Old Goyle, who hadn't just avoided losing weight in prison but had put on a great deal, greeted his visitor. His eyes flicked to Theodore, and he broke into a surprised smile. "Theodore, I'm your Uncle Goyle." "Uncle Goyle?" Theodore froze, matching the bloated man before him to the big, simple-minded figure he'd known. He glanced at the cell's interior. The difference wasn't obvious at first, but on closer inspection, the man's meals were extravagant. There were even diversions, ghost stones, and wizard's chess. "You come to see your father?" Old Goyle chuckled, rubbing his belly. "You should try to talk some sense into him. He's still dreaming about the Lord Voldemort days." "All right, Old Goyle." Norman shook his head, half amused, half helpless. "You'll be out soon. Try losing some weight," Old Goyle harumphed, unconvinced. "Have you seen Crabbe? He's the fattest of us all." Norman was speechless. What was there to compare? Honestly, he was a little envious of these 2 simple folk. When most entered Azkaban, even if they lived, they were stripped down, left hollowed and broken. But these 2 had not only avoided that fate, they'd grown fat. Their life sentences had been reduced to 2 years. They'd understood their predicament and abandoned Lord Voldemort. They'd also not squandered the chance their seniors and juniors had fought for. 2 years were almost up, and they'd caused no trouble. When Death Eaters were first imprisoned, they'd shouted and raged, but these 2 had acted as if they were going home. With time, they grew carefree and fat. Those who'd arrived with them either stayed until death or died outright, whereas these 2 would be out in 2 years. The thought made Theodore's chest tighten. If he'd sought John earlier, perhaps his father wouldn't be stuck here forever. After bidding Old Goyle farewell, they continued deeper. Azkaban was divided into 9 upper and 9 lower levels. The further down one went, the graver the crimes and the worse the conditions. A bone-deep cold came up from the lowest level. Theodore's breath came out as a white puff. His father, Old Knot, lay before him, emaciated and skeletal like a living mummy. Hair in disarray, he muttered to himself. "I'll wait for you outside," Norman said, seeing the shock in Theodore's face, and turned to go. He wasn't worried Theodore might spring a rescue. This place didn't even have windows. All the light came from the single kerosene lamp Norman had brought. Normally, there was no light at all here, only the silence of death and the constant groans of torment. In the darkness, those fears were magnified until most prisoners went mad. "The Master will lead the purebloods to rule this world. We will kill all the muggles." Old Knot screamed at the kerosene glow as if driven by it. "The Dark Lord will come back. Everyone must die." He laughed horribly at his own delirium. Theodore stepped closer. "Even in madness, you still think of him," Theodore said, low. "You've never thought of your child." "Child?" Old Knot's eyes cleared, as if a sliver of recognition had finally cut through the fog. He crawled out of the corner on all fours, his skeletal hands locking onto the bars. He stared at Theodore with an intensity that made his face a mask of zeal. "My son, you must find the Master. He is immortal. He will surely return. At that time, we will rule this world, and everyone will be our slaves," Old Knot shrieked. Theodore watched him in silence for a long moment. "Lord Voldemort is dead," he said finally. "No," Old Knot roared like a wounded animal. "You lie to me. He is the greatest wizard, omniscient, omnipotent. He will come back." Old Knot slammed his head against the unbreakable bars and howled, "He will return, and all the disloyal will die." Theodore drew a breath, closed his eyes, and opened them again. The last filaments of familial affection snapped. "My king," he said, cold, "will conquer this world, and the old order will be swallowed up." After one last look at his father, Theodore set the lamp down. "I will put Knot back where he belongs, my way." Then he turned and left. It would be his last visit. Under the dim lamp, Old Knot's cry followed him, a long, chilling roar. Emerging from the lowest level, Theodore found Norman checking his watch. "Thought you'd stay longer," Norman said with a casual shrug and asked, "Are you sure this is enough?" Theodore nodded. "How long will he stay in there?" "Until he dies." Norman smiled blandly. "Could be a year, 10 years, 100. "If it were me, I'd choose a quicker death," Theodore muttered. Endless imprisonment was worse than death. Sometimes death was mercy. He watched Norman smile, knowing this man was no better than the rest. "I hope he's gone within a year." Theodore placed a pouch of galleons into Norman's hand. "Please, you shouldn't have come to me, but—" Norman pushed the money back, placed his right hand over his heart, and inclined his head with a thin smile. "My king asked me to see your request honored." Chapter 656, Escape, Evidence Poland. "Fuck! Fuck! Fuck!" Gauci was running through the night, dragging a corpse and swearing at anything that moved, along with a few vulgar comments about Rippy's anatomy. He slid to avoid a flying charm, drew his wand, and fired a green bolt without looking back. One of his pursuers nearly took it. He flicked his wand and apparated away. "Don't let him go." The aurors behind him apparated in pursuit. Both sides blinked in and out of locations as they chased each other. On his fourth apparition, Gauci staggered. The shock cut deep. A long scarlet tear across his arm showed he'd almost been splinched. "Too many apparitions. I can't hold it." He dug Dittany from his robes and poured it clumsily over the wound. Before he could properly heal himself, the pursuers closed in again. Gauci was wounded, cornered, and carrying a corpse. He parried a red light, retaliated, and felled one attacker, but then a hail of spells came at him. A green bolt streaked toward him. Without hesitation, he used the corpse as a shield to absorb an Avada Kedavra. A dead body can't die twice, but the impact sent Gauci flying. "Minister Schmidt, you're more useful dead than alive," he muttered, staggering and then leaping across a suddenly appearing pit. He dived into the trees, then silence swallowed him. The aurors from the ministry halted one by one. Star walked ahead of them, waving a hand to keep them moving. Not long after they entered the forest, a scream split the air. One auror turned and saw armor rise from the earth and bind a man hand and foot, flinging his wand away. The armor held him kneeling and gagged. Other aurors triggered different traps, wooden beasts, binding vines, each trap locking them down. Star sidestepped a mechanically rising wooden dog and then threw up a hand, casting a spark that sent it tumbling. "Silver hand device?" he sneered, then shouted a clearing spell. "Lumos Maxima!" A ball of bright light shot up into the night, illuminating the forest and revealing traps hidden in shadow. By the time they cleared and collected what they could, Gauci was long gone. All footprints and traces had vanished. Star tracked the drying spoor with magic and found nothing. He knew with certainty who had been behind the escape, Gauci. With no leads, they had to return empty-handed. "Collect every silver hand device," Star ordered. "I want to interrogate whoever can tell me about these things." They hauled away the untriggered traps, hoping to use them as leverage when they questioned Silver Hand operatives. When the aurors left, in a small boat downriver, a different scene emerged. The sunken craft that had taken on water slowly rose and bobbed to the surface. Gauci and the corpse lay in it together. He spat out river water, patted the dead man's hand, and murmured, "Minister, you're bloody precious." After all these days, even within the ministry, the corpse had begun to smell. "I searched everywhere and couldn't find Ing. Looks like only you can get me out of this mess." He gave a weak wand flick, and the boat propelled itself toward the shore and his home. Back in the town, at the Silver Hand Johnny store, Star arrived furious, carrying the confiscated devices. Tang Mi sat calmly behind the counter and leisurely sized him up. "Mr. Rosier," he said without hurry, "you had plenty of time to come pay me a visit." "You still playing dumb?" Star barked. "You secretly aided the invaders and supplied them with Silver Hand devices." "Oh?" Tang Mi feigned surprise. I don't recall doing any such thing. Has the ministry been invaded again?